Trial of Shadows, Chapter 1. The Healer's Daughter. The early spring sun cast a pale glow over Salem village, its warmth slow to chase away the lingering chill of winter. Frost clung stubbornly to the edges of the fields, shimmering like a scattering of diamonds. Mercy Hale stood barefoot in the damp soil of their herb garden, the cool earth a familiar comfort beneath her feet. She drew in a deep breath, the crisp air filled with the scents of rosemary and sage, mingling with the faint brine of the distant sea. "Careful with the St. John's wort, Mercy," her mother, Sarah Hale, called from a nearby row. Clad in a worn but well-kept apron over her plain woolen dress, Sarah knelt beside a cluster of newly sprouted plants. Her dark hair was tucked neatly beneath a linen cap, a few stray wisps framing her sharp, intelligent eyes. "Yes, Mother," Mercy replied, adjusting her footing to avoid the delicate seedlings. She cradled a basket filled with freshly cut sprigs of thyme and lavender, their fragrances enveloping her like a comforting shawl. Each herb had been harvested with precision, following the meticulous methods her mother had taught her. "Do you remember why we harvest lavender in the early morning?" Sarah asked, moving to stand beside her. Mercy nodded. "The oils are strongest before the sun is high," she recited. "The potency makes for better remedies." "Very good," Sarah said with a hint of a smile. "And the thyme?" "It's best gathered before it flowers, when the leaves are rich in their essence." "Exactly." Sarah rested a hand on Mercy's shoulder. "You're learning well." They continued their work in companionable silence, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the distant murmur of the village awakening. The herb garden was expansive, a tapestry of greens and subtle blooms that stretched behind their modest home at the edge of the woods. It was both a sanctuary and a source of livelihood, each plant cultivated with care and purpose. "Mother," Mercy began hesitantly, "why do we hang the chamomile to dry in bundles rather than laying it flat?" Sarah glanced at her daughter, amusement dancing in her eyes. Hanging allows the air to circulate more freely, preventing mould and preserving the flower's healing properties. Mercy smiled appreciatively. "I see, thank you." "Never stop asking questions, Mercy," Sarah encouraged, her expression turning serious. "Knowledge is our greatest tool, but we must wield it wisely." Mercy sensed the underlying caution in her mother's words. In Salem, curiosity could be a double-edged sword. A figure appeared at the edge of the garden path, catching their attention. Martha Carter approached hesitantly, her usually stern features softened by a flicker of unease. Dressed in sombre hues befitting a widow, she clutched a worn shawl tightly around her shoulders. "Good morning, Martha," Sarah greeted her calmly. "You're out early." Martha offered a tight smile. "As are you, Mistress Hale." "Is there something we can assist you with?" Sarah asked, a note of genuine concern in her voice. Martha hesitated, her gaze flickering to Mercy before settling back on Sarah. I have need of your remedies." "Of course," Sarah replied smoothly. "Come, let's talk inside." Mercy stepped forward. "Shall I gather any particular herbs, Mother?" "Not just yet," Sarah said, her eyes conveying a silent request for discretion. They guided Martha into the house, the interior warm and inviting. Dried herbs hung from the beams, casting shadows that danced in the gentle breeze from the open window. The scent of rosemary and sage mingled with the faint aroma of beeswax from the candles lining the mantel. "Please, have a seat," Sarah offered, gesturing to a sturdy wooden chair crafted by Mercy's father years before. Martha sat stiffly, her hands twisting the fringe of her shawl. "It's my husband," she began quietly. "Edwin's cough has worsened. He's feverish and struggles to breathe." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I'm sorry to hear that. I have a tincture of elderberry and mullein that may ease his symptoms." Martha bit her lip. "He refuses to seek help, says it's God's will and that he'll recover through prayer alone." "Yet you came here," Sarah observed gently. "I fear for his life," Martha admitted, her composure wavering. "I couldn't bear to lose him. Not after Abigail." A moment of heavy silence settled in the room. Mercy glanced between the two women, sensing a deeper history. She remembered whispers of Martha's sister, Abigail, who had succumbed to a mysterious illness years before. Sarah's eyes softened with empathy. "I understand your worry." Martha met her gaze. "I know others might not approve of me seeking your aid, given past misunderstandings." "We've always been willing to help," Sarah assured her, "regardless of any differences." Martha's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you." "Mercy," Sarah said, turning to her daughter, "please fetch the elderberry syrup and mullein leaves." "Right away," Mercy replied, moving to the shelves where neatly labelled jars and bottles stood in orderly rows. As she gathered the items, she listened to the low murmur of conversation between her mother and Martha. "Edwin still blames you for Abigail's passing," Martha confessed. "He believes more could have been done." Sarah's expression remained composed. "I did all I could with the knowledge I had. Some illnesses are beyond our healing." Martha sighed heavily. "I tried to tell him that, but grief clouds reason." "Perhaps this remedy will help ease not just his body, but his heart as well," Sarah suggested. Mercy returned with the requested supplies. "Here they are, Mother." "Thank you." Sarah began preparing the tincture, carefully measuring and mixing the ingredients. "Mercy, would you mind stepping outside to gather fresh peppermint? It will aid in soothing the cough." "Of course," Mercy said, recognizing the subtle request for privacy. She exited the house, the cool air a stark contrast to the warmth inside. As she made her way back to the garden, she couldn't help but ponder the tension between her mother and Martha. The mention of Abigail stirred vague memories, hushed conversations, and a sombre atmosphere that had settled over the village at the time. Selecting the healthiest peppermint leaves, Mercy recalled how her father used to explain the importance of each plant, not just for its medicinal properties, but for the stories it carried. Thomas Hale had been a man of the world, his travels taking him far beyond the confines of Salem before settling down to start a family. His tales of distant lands and diverse cultures had ignited Mercy's own curiosity. She smiled wistfully, plucking a leaf and inhaling its invigorating scent. Her father's passing 3 years prior had left a void that still echoed within her, but his spirit lived on in the lessons he had imparted. "Always seek the truth, my little dove," he would say. "The world is vast, and understanding is our greatest ally." Returning to the house, Mercy found Martha preparing to leave. "Here is the peppermint," Mercy said, handing it to her mother. "Excellent." Sarah added the leaves to a small pouch. "Steep this in hot water and have Edwin inhale the steam. It should help clear his lungs." Martha accepted the pouch gratefully. "I can't thank you enough." "There's no need for thanks," Sarah replied kindly. "I only ask that you follow the instructions carefully." Martha nodded, her eyes lingering on Sarah's. Perhaps it's time to put the past behind us." "I would welcome that," Sarah said softly. With a final, fleeting smile, Martha departed, leaving mother and daughter alone once more. "Mother," Mercy began cautiously, "what happened with Abigail?" Sarah sighed, sinking into a chair. "Abigail fell ill suddenly. I did all I could, but the fever was relentless. Some believed there was more I should have done." "Is that why Edwin resents us?" "In part," Sarah admitted. Grief can breed anger, and anger seeks a target. Mercy frowned. It's unjust. You did your best. Life is not always just, my dear, Sarah said gently. But we must continue to do what is right. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Exchanging a glance, Sarah stood to answer it. "Good day, Reverend Paris," she greeted, her tone respectful yet guarded. Reverend Samuel Paris stood on the threshold, his austere black robes stark against the earthy tones of their home. His sharp eyes surveyed the interior with a hint of disapproval. "Good day, Mistress Hale," he replied curtly. "I trust all is well?" "As well as can be," Sarah responded. "How may we assist you?" "I wish to speak with you regarding certain matters," he said, stepping inside uninvited. His gaze settled briefly on Mercy before returning to Sarah. "There are concerns about influences that may lead our congregation astray." "Influences?" Sarah echoed. Paris clasped his hands behind his back. "There is talk of folk engaging in practices that border on the superstitious, remedies and potions that may detract from reliance on God's providence." Mercy felt a flush of indignation rise, but held her tongue. "We offer assistance to those in need," Sarah said evenly, "using the knowledge granted to us to alleviate suffering." "Knowledge can be a slippery slope," Paris warned. "It is imperative that all teachings align with Scripture." "Of course," Sarah agreed. "We abide by the laws of both God and the colony." Paris narrowed his eyes. "See that you do. The eyes of the Lord and the community are ever watchful." With a stiff nod, he turned and left, as abruptly as he had arrived. Mercy released a breath she hadn't realised she'd been holding. "He practically accused us of wrongdoing." "Calm yourself," Sarah advised. "Reverend Paris holds considerable sway. It's best not to provoke him." "He seems determined to find fault," Mercy grumbled. "All the more reason for us to proceed with caution," her mother replied. "Now, let's return to our work." They resumed their tasks, but the encounter left a lingering unease. Mercy pondered the Reverend's veiled threats and the implications for their family. The delicate balance they maintained within the community seemed more precarious than ever. "Mother," she ventured after a while, "do you think we'll ever be truly accepted here?" Sarah looked up from her work. "We've lived in Salem for over 15 years. Your father and I chose this place to build a life, a safe haven after years of travel." "Tell me again about those times," Mercy prompted, seeking comfort in familiar stories. A fond smile touched Sarah's lips. "Your father was a merchant sailor when I met him. We travelled up and down the coast, trading goods and learning the ways of different towns." "Did you like travelling?" "Very much," Sarah admitted. "There was freedom in it, a chance to see the world and learn from it." "Why did you settle in Salem?" "After you were born, we wanted stability," she explained. "Your father believed this village offered a strong community and a place where we could put down roots." Mercy traced a pattern on the table. "Do you ever regret it?" "Regret? No," Sarah said firmly. "This is our home now. But that doesn't mean we can't strive to make it better." Mercy considered her mother's words. "Perhaps we can find a way to ease the tensions." "Perhaps," Sarah agreed, though her tone suggested scepticism. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as they worked side by side. Sarah took the opportunity to delve deeper into teaching Mercy the nuances of their craft. "When harvesting willow bark," she instructed, "it's best done in early spring when the sap is rising. The inner bark contains salicin, which helps reduce fevers and pain." Mercy nodded, absorbing the information. "And we scrape it gently to avoid damaging the tree." Exactly. Respect for the plant ensures it continues to provide for us. They moved through the garden, Sarah pointing out various plants and their optimal harvesting times. The foxglove must be handled with care, she cautioned. In small doses it can strengthen the heart, but too much is poisonous. How do we measure it correctly? Mercy asked. By using precise amounts, Sarah replied, demonstrating with a small scale. Always double-check your calculations. Their lesson was interrupted by the arrival of Nathaniel Nate Foster, a young carpenter and family friend. His sandy hair caught the sunlight, and his blue eyes reflected a sincerity that Mercy found endearing. "Good afternoon, Mistress Hale. Mercy," he greeted, tipping his hat. "Nathaniel," Sarah acknowledged with a nod, "what brings you by?" "I've finished repairing the fence along your western boundary," he informed them. "Thought I'd let you know it's secure." "Thank you," Sarah said appreciatively. "Your workmanship is always reliable." Nate's gaze shifted to Mercy. "I could show you the work if you'd like." Mercy felt a warmth rise in her cheeks. "I'd be interested to see it." "Go ahead," Sarah encouraged, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "We've done enough for today." As they walked toward the fence, Nate matched his stride to hers. "How have you been?" he asked. "Well enough," Mercy replied, "though it seems the village grows more tense by the day." He nodded solemnly. "I've noticed it too, people quick to suspicion and slow to reason." "Do you think it's something to worry about?" she asked. He glanced at her thoughtfully. "I believe caution is wise, but I also believe in standing by what's right." They reached the fence, and Nate pointed out the reinforced posts and smoothed rails. "It's excellent work," Mercy praised, running her hand along the sturdy wood. "Thank you." "Anything for you and your mother," he said earnestly. A comfortable silence settled between them before Nate spoke again. "If you ever need assistance, you know you can call on me." Mercy met his gaze, gratitude mixing with an unspoken understanding. "I appreciate that." As they returned to the house, Mercy spotted Hester Goodwin watching from a distance, her sharp eyes missing nothing. The older woman's scrutiny sent a shiver down Mercy's spine. "She seems to be everywhere," Mercy murmured. "Best ignore her," Nate advised. "Giving her attention only fuels the gossip." "Sound counsel," Sarah agreed as they approached. "Stay for supper, Nathaniel." "Thank you, but I must get back," he replied. "My father expects me to help with the new timber shipment." "Another time then," Sarah said kindly. "Good evening," he said, tipping his hat once more before departing. That night, as the household settled, Mercy sat by the hearth, the flames casting a warm glow over her features. She held a small locket, her father's, which contained a miniature portrait of their family from years past. "Father would know what to do," she whispered. Sarah joined her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Your father had a way of finding light in the darkest of times." "Tell me more about him," Mercy requested softly. Sarah's eyes shimmered with fondness. "He was a man of integrity and great kindness. His laughter could fill a room, and his stories brought the world to our doorstep." "I wish I remembered more," Mercy said wistfully. "He loved you dearly," her mother assured her. "You were the light of his life." They sat together in quiet reflection, the bonds of family providing solace amidst uncertainty. "Whatever comes," Sarah said firmly, "we will face it together." Mercy nodded, resolve hardening within her. "Yes, we will." As she prepared for bed, Mercy contemplated the day's events, the subtle warnings, the veiled threats, and the steadfast support of those she trusted. The path ahead was shrouded in shadows, but she felt a stirring of determination. Climbing beneath the quilt, she whispered a silent prayer for guidance and strength. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, her dreams were filled with images of light piercing through darkness. Outside, the moon bathed Salem in its silvery glow, a silent guardian over those who dared to seek truth in a world ruled by fear. Letter from Reverend Samuel Parris to Magistrate Thomas Sewall, January 4th, 1692. Honoured Magistrate Sewall. It has come to my notice that certain practices within our small Salem are stirring concern among our good folk, namely the household of one Sarah Hale, known in whispers for her unorthodox remedies, her charms and whispered counsel. Though my duties rarely extend beyond prayer and counsel, I fear that such influences, unchecked, could weaken the spiritual vigilance of this God-fearing town. Might it be prudent, then, to establish closer oversight of those who deal in such practices? I submit to your greater wisdom and authority in all matters, as I seek only to ensure our Salem remains pure in both faith and conduct. In godly trust, Samuel Parris. Chapter 2. Daily Life in Salem. The heavy silence of the meeting-house pressed down upon Mercy Hale like a tangible weight. Rows of stern faces stared forward, eyes fixed on the pulpit where Reverend Samuel Parris stood, his gaze sweeping over the congregation with a penetrating intensity. The wooden benches were hard and unforgiving, much like the doctrines preached within these walls. Let us reflect upon the snares of the devil that lurk in every shadow, Reverend Parris intoned, his voice slicing through the stillness. For he seeks to corrupt the hearts of the faithful and lead them astray. Mercy's hands rested in her lap, fingers entwined tightly around a worn kerchief. She dared not shift in her seat, though a knot was forming between her shoulders. Beside her, her mother Sarah sat composed, her expression a mask of piety. The air inside the meeting-house was stale, carrying the faint sense of sweat and damp wool, a testament to the packed bodies enduring the lengthy sermon. The interior of the meeting-house was austere, its unadorned wooden walls rising to a peaked ceiling supported by sturdy beams. Narrow windows allowed slivers of light to penetrate, casting thin stripes across the floor. There were no decorations, no symbols of comfort, only the stark reminder of their mortal obligations to God. Reverend Parris leaned forward, his hands gripping the edges of the pulpit. We must remain ever vigilant. The forces of darkness are insidious, creeping into our homes and hearts under the guise of innocence. Mercy felt a chill crawl up her spine. The Reverend's words had grown increasingly severe in recent weeks, his warnings more dire. Whispers among the villagers spoke of his dissatisfaction with the community's devotion, his suspicions of hidden sins. Across the aisle, Mercy caught sight of Eliza Putnam. Eliza's fair hair was neatly tucked beneath her bonnet, but a stray wisp had escaped, curling against her cheek. Her blue eyes met Mercy's for a fleeting moment, a flicker of shared understanding passing between them, before they both lowered their gazes. Reflect upon your actions, Reverend Parris continued. Root out the evil within, lest it consume you and those you hold dear. At last the sermon drew to a close. The congregation rose as one, the collective rustling of garments and shifting of feet breaking the oppressive silence. Reverend Parris offered a final, solemn blessing before stepping down from the pulpit, his robes swaying with each deliberate movement. Mercy followed her mother out of the pew, the wooden floorboards creaking beneath their feet. As they filed toward the exit, muted conversations began to ripple through the crowd. "Did you hear about Goody Proctor's mishap with the churn?" one woman whispered to another. "A sign, surely," her companion replied with a grave nod. Outside, the sky was a canvas of grey, clouds hanging low as if mirroring the sombre mood of the village. The meeting house stood at the centre of Salem, its plain facade reflecting the community's disdain for frivolity. Surrounding it were the modest homes and shops of the villagers, connected by dirt paths worn smooth by constant use. "Mercy," her mother said softly, drawing her attention. "I must speak with Mistress Jacobs about her order of herbs. Will you manage the chores at home?" "Of course, Mother," Mercy replied. Sarah offered a faint smile. "You're a good girl. Remember to fetch water from the well before the crowds gather." "I will," As her mother moved away to join a cluster of women, deep in discussion, Mercy felt a light touch on her elbow. "Walk with me?" Eliza asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Gladly," Mercy agreed. They set off toward the edge of the village, their footsteps falling into sync. The path led past the blacksmith's forge, where the ring of hammer on anvil punctuated the air. The scent of smoke mingled with that of freshly baked bread from the nearby bakery, a small comfort amid the rigidity of their surroundings. "Reverend Paris seems more severe than ever," Eliza remarked once they were out of earshot of others. Mercy glanced sideways at her friend. "He does. His sermons are filled with warnings and threats. It's as if he sees enemies everywhere." Eliza sighed. "Father says we must heed his words. That danger lurks unseen." "Do you believe that?" Mercy asked carefully. Eliza hesitated. "I don't know. It's hard to question when everyone else seems so certain." They reached Eliza's home, a large, well-maintained house that reflected the Putnam family's status in Salem. The white clappered siding gleamed even under the overcast sky, and the windows were adorned with neatly crafted shutters. A tidy garden lined the front, though the flowers had yet to bloom in the early season. "Would you like to help me with the washing?" Eliza offered. "It might be more pleasant with company." "I'd be happy to," Mercy replied. They made their way to the back of the house, where a line was strung between two sturdy posts. A wooden washtub sat nearby, steam rising from the hot water within. Eliza's younger sister Abigail played nearby, her laughter a bright note in the subdued atmosphere. As they began to scrub the linens, Eliza's expression grew contemplative. "Mother is pressing me to spend more time on my needlework," she said. "She wants you to prepare for marriage," Mercy surmised. "Yes, there are expectations." Mercy nodded. "I understand. My mother often reminds me of my duties as well." Eliza offered a wry smile. "But you have talents beyond sewing and cooking. Your knowledge of herbs is remarkable." "Not everyone sees it that way," Mercy replied quietly. "Some view it with suspicion." Eliza paused, her hands stilling in the soapy water. "Have you heard any rumours?" "Only whispers," Mercy admitted. "But in Salem, whispers can become accusations." Eliza's gaze dropped. "I worry for you." Mercy reached over to squeeze her friend's hand. "We must be cautious, but we cannot live in constant fear." Before Eliza could respond, the back door opened, and Mistress Putnam stepped out. Her sharp features were softened by the pale light, but there was a perpetual sternness to her demeanour. "Eliza, have you finished the washing?" she inquired, her tone brisk. "Nearly, Mother," Eliza replied. Mistress Putnam's eyes flicked to Mercy. "Good day, Mercy." "Good day, Mistress Putnam," Mercy replied politely. "You should be mindful of the time," Mistress Putnam said to her daughter. "There is much to do." "Yes, Mother." As Mistress Putnam retreated into the house, Eliza sighed softly. "She means well, but sometimes I feel—" She trailed off, searching for the words. "Confined?" Mercy offered. "Yes." They continued their work in silence for a time, the rhythmic motions offering a semblance of peace. When the last of the linens were hung to dry, Mercy gathered her shawl. "I should be going," she said. "There's much to do at home." "Thank you for your help," Eliza said earnestly. "I'm glad we could spend this time together." As Mercy walked away, she glanced back to see Eliza watching her, a hint of longing in her expression. The weight of unspoken thoughts hung between them, but neither knew how to voice them in a world that left little room for individuality. Making her way through the village, Mercy noted the clusters of people engaged in quiet conversations, their faces etched with concern. The air was thick with unease, as if the village itself sensed the brewing storm. At the well, a small queue had formed. Women balanced empty buckets, their chatter hushed. Mercy joined the line, her gaze drifting over the familiar faces. Goody Proctor, with her kind eyes and gentle smile, offered a nod of greeting. In contrast, Hester Goodwin stood apart, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Such a gloomy day," Hester remarked to no one in particular. "Fitting, perhaps, for the times we live in." Mercy kept her expression neutral, focusing on the ground. "Have you heard about Goody Osborne's misfortune?" Hester continued, her voice carrying an edge. "What misfortune?" another woman asked hesitantly. "Her chickens stopped laying eggs," Hester said gravely. "A sign, surely, of ill omens." "Perhaps it's simply the season," Mercy interjected softly. Hester turned her gaze upon Mercy. "Or perhaps there are other forces at work, unseen but not unfelt." Before Mercy could respond, a warm voice interrupted. "Good day, ladies," Nate Foster greeted as he approached, his easy smile momentarily dispelling the tension. Several of the women offered polite replies, though Hester's expression remained guarded. "Mercy," Nate said, his eyes meeting hers. "Fetching water?" "Yes," she replied, a slight smile tugging at her lips. "Allow me to assist," he offered, taking her bucket before she could protest. "That's very kind of you," she said. Hester watched the exchange with keen interest. "Young Master Foster is ever helpful," she commented. "Only doing my part," Nate replied good-naturedly. As he lowered the bucket into the well, Mercy felt Hester's gaze lingering. There was a prying curiosity in the older woman's eyes that set Mercy on edge. "Your mother is well, I trust?" Hester asked. "She is, thank you," Mercy replied. "Busy with her remedies?" Hester probed. Mercy met her gaze evenly. "She tends to those in need." "Admirable," Hester said, though her tone suggested otherwise. The bucket emerged from the well, filled to the brim. Nate secured it and handed it to Mercy. "There you are." "Thank you," she said sincerely. "May I walk you home?" he asked. Mercy hesitated, aware of Hester's watchful eyes. "I wouldn't want to trouble you." "It's no trouble at all," Nate assured her. "Very well," she agreed. As they departed, Mercy could feel the weight of speculation following them. Once they were out of earshot, she let out a small sigh. "Don't mind Hester," Nate said. "She finds amusement in others' affairs." "Perhaps," Mercy replied. "But her words carry weight with some." He glanced at her thoughtfully. "Is everything all right?" She considered confiding in him, but decided against burdening him with her worries. "Just the usual concerns." He nodded, accepting her evasion. "If there's ever anything I can do, you need only ask." "I appreciate that," she said, offering a grateful smile. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the path leading past fields where early crops were beginning to sprout. The landscape was a patchwork of greens and browns, the promise of growth juxtaposed against the austerity of their lives. "Do you enjoy working with your father?" Mercy asked. Nate shrugged lightly. "Carpentry is honest work. Building something tangible gives a sense of accomplishment." "Your craftsmanship is admired," she noted. He smiled modestly. I learned from the best. My father has a keen eye for detail." They reached the gate of her home, the familiar sight bringing a sense of solace. The modest house stood sturdy against the elements, the herb garden flourishing under her mother's care. "Thank you for walking with me," Mercy said. "It was my pleasure," Nate replied. He hesitated for a moment. "Perhaps we could meet at the market tomorrow. I hear there's a shipment of new fabrics arriving." Mercy's eyes lit up. "I'd like that." "Until then," he said, tipping his hat before turning to leave. She watched him go, a soft warmth blooming in her chest. His kindness was a balm in uncertain times. Entering the house, Mercy found her mother grinding herbs at the table, the mortar and pestle working in a steady rhythm. "How was your morning?" Sarah asked without looking up. "Eventful," Mercy replied, setting the bucket near the hearth. Sarah glanced at her, noting the undertone in her voice. "Something troubles you." Mercy considered her words carefully. "There is much talk in the village, whispers of misfortune and omens." Her mother resumed her task. "Such talk is common when people are restless. Hester Goodwin seems particularly intent on finding signs of wrongdoing," Mercy added. Sarah's expression remained calm. "Hester has always been one to stir the pot." "She asked about you," Mercy said. Sarah met her gaze. "And what did you tell her?" "Only that you tend to those in need." "Good." Sarah set aside the pestle. "We have nothing to hide, but it's wise to be cautious." Mercy approached the table, eyeing the mixture her mother was preparing. "What are you making?" "A poultice for Goody Proctor's rheumatism," Sarah explained. "Willow bark and comfrey." "May I help?" "Of course." Sarah handed her a bundle of dried leaves. "Crush these finely." They worked together in harmonious silence, the familiar ritual bringing comfort. The scents of the herbs filled the air, a fragrant reminder of their purpose. "Mother," Mercy ventured after a time, "do you ever feel constrained by the expectations placed upon us?" Sarah considered the question. "There are times when the weight of others' judgments feels heavy, but we must remain true to ourselves." "Eliza feels it too," Mercy said. "She longs for more than what is prescribed." "She is a good friend," Sarah acknowledged, "and from a respectable family. Yet she is not content," Mercy observed. "Contentment comes from within," her mother replied gently. "It's not always tied to circumstance." They completed the poultice and wrapped it carefully. Sarah set it aside with a satisfied nod. "Will you deliver this to Goody Proctor?" she asked. "She lives near the smithy." "Certainly," Mercy agreed. As she prepared to leave, Sarah placed a hand on her shoulder. "Be mindful of your surroundings. These are delicate times." "I will," Mercy promised. The afternoon sun was waning as Mercy made her way through the village. Shadows stretched long across the ground, and a cool breeze rustled the budding leaves overhead. Approaching Goody Proctor's home, she saw the woman seated on the porch, her hands clasped in her lap. Elizabeth Proctor was a woman of quiet dignity, her eyes reflecting both kindness and a hint of sorrow. "Good afternoon, Goody Proctor," Mercy called softly. "Mercy Hale," Elizabeth greeted with a gentle smile. "What brings you by?" "I have a poultice from my mother for your rheumatism," Mercy explained, holding out the package. Elizabeth's eyes warmed. "How thoughtful. Please, come sit with me a moment." Mercy obliged, taking a seat beside her. "Your mother is a blessing," Elizabeth said, unwrapping the poultice. "Her remedies have eased my pains more than once." "She is glad to help," Mercy replied. Elizabeth studied her for a moment. "You carry a burden." Mercy was taken aback. It's nothing." "Sometimes it helps to speak of our troubles," Elizabeth encouraged. Mercy hesitated. There was a sincerity in Elizabeth's gaze that invited trust. "There is much unrest in the village," Mercy began cautiously. "Whispers of dark forces and accusations." Elizabeth nodded slowly. "I've heard the murmurs. Fear has a way of spreading like a plague." "I worry for my mother," Mercy admitted. "Her work is misunderstood by some." Elizabeth placed a reassuring hand on Mercy's. "Your mother is a good woman. Those who know her will stand by her." "I hope so," Mercy said softly. "Hold fast to your convictions," Elizabeth advised. "Truth will prevail in the end." They sat together a while longer, the quiet companionship offering solace. "Thank you for your kindness," Mercy said as she rose to leave. "Any time, my dear," Elizabeth replied, "and thank your mother for me." "I will." As Mercy made her way home, dusk began to settle, the sky painted with hues of pink and gold. The village was quieting, the day's activities winding down. Back at the house, Sarah had prepared a simple supper of stew and fresh bread. They ate in companionable silence, the events of the day weighing lightly between them. Afterward, Mercy retreated to her small room, lighting a candle that cast a warm glow over the modest furnishings. She retrieved one of her mother's herbal journals from its place on the shelf. The leather-bound volume was worn, its pages filled with meticulous notes and illustrations. Settling onto her bed, Mercy opened the book to a page detailing the properties of valerian root. As she read, she felt a sense of connection to the knowledge within, a legacy passed down through generations of wise women. The words flowed over her like a soothing balm, the outside world fading as she immersed herself in the study. Here, in these pages, was a world of discovery and purpose, untainted by fear and suspicion. A faint knock at her door drew her attention. "Come in," she called softly. Sarah entered, a gentle smile on her face. "I thought you might still be awake." "I was just reading," Mercy said, holding up the journal. Her mother sat beside her. "You've always had a thirst for knowledge." "I find comfort in it," Mercy admitted. "It helps make sense of things." Sarah placed a hand over hers. "Never lose that curiosity. It's a gift." "Even if others don't understand?" Mercy asked. "Especially then," her mother affirmed. "The world needs those who seek truth." They sat together in the quiet glow of the candle, the unspoken bond between them strengthening. "Rest now," Sarah said gently. "Tomorrow is a new day." "Good night, Mother." As Sarah left the room, Mercy closed the journal, her mind lingering on the words within. Despite the uncertainties that surrounded them, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Blowing out the candle, she settled under the quilt, the scent of lavender lulling her towards sleep. In the darkness, she held on to the hope that knowledge and understanding could light the way through the shadows of fear. Outside, the village of Salem lay shrouded in night, the flicker of lanterns casting small islands of light. Unseen currents stirred beneath the surface, but for now, Mercy found peace in the quiet corners of her world. Letter from Abigail Carter to Sarah Hale. May 14th, 1688. My dearest Sarah, our afternoons by the river, learning of rosemary, sage, and the secrets they hold, have become a true source of joy and purpose for me. I cannot begin to express the gratitude I feel for your teaching and kindness. This knowledge stirs something within, a purpose beyond what this village often offers its daughters. Though Martha frets about my interests, calling them idle pursuits, I feel otherwise. I am convinced that these remedies are gifts, and that we can both aid and soothe. May we always share in this path, and may it bring peace to those who need it most. In fond affection, Abigail. Chapter 3. The First Whispers. Mercy Hale could feel the weight of the villagers' eyes upon her as she walked the well-worn path toward the Carter residence. Whispers trailed in her wake, hushed conversations that ceased whenever she turned her head. Something unspoken hung in the air, a tension that set her nerves on edge. Her mother, Sarah, walked beside her with a healer's satchel clutched tightly in one hand. The other rested lightly on Mercy's arm, a subtle gesture of reassurance. They had received an urgent message at dawn. Martha Carter's youngest child, Samuel, had fallen gravely ill overnight. Without hesitation, they set out to offer their aid. "Remember what we've discussed," Sarah said softly, her gaze fixed ahead. "Observe carefully and speak little." "Yes, Mother," Mercy replied, adjusting the basket of fresh linens and herbs she carried. She understood the delicacy required in these situations. The village was a web of interconnected lives, and a misstep could send tremors through the entire community. As they approached the modest Carter home, Mercy noticed Hester Goodwin lingering nearby, her sharp eyes following their every move. Hester offered a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mistress Hale," Hester greeted. "Out early, I see." "Good morning, Mistress Goodwin," Sarah replied evenly. "We're here to tend to young Samuel." Hester's gaze flickered with something akin to skepticism. "Such a sudden illness. Unfortunate, isn't it?" "Indeed," Sarah said, offering no further comment. Mercy felt a prickle of unease, but followed her mother up the steps to the front door. Martha Carter opened it before they could knock, her face etched with worry. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Martha said, her voice strained. "He's been burning with fever all night." "Let's see what we can do," Sarah replied gently. Inside, the air was thick with the sense of sickness and fear. Samuel lay on a small bed in the corner, his cheeks flushed crimson against the pallor of his skin. His breaths came in shallow gasps, each one seeming a battle. Sarah moved to the boy's side, her movements swift yet unhurried. She placed a cool hand on his forehead, then gently examined his throat and listened to his breathing. "Mercy, prepare a compress with the feverfew and chamomile," Sarah instructed. "Right away," Mercy responded, setting down her basket. As she worked, Mercy could hear the low murmur of voices outside the window. Glancing discreetly through the curtain, she saw that a small group of villagers had gathered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Hester Goodwin stood among them, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Mother," Mercy whispered, "they're watching us." "I know," Sarah replied calmly. "Focus on the task at hand." Mercy nodded, her fingers deftly mixing the herbs with cool water. She brought the compress to Sarah, who placed it gently on Samuel's forehead. "He's so weak," Martha murmured, wringing her hands. "Will he be all right?" "We'll do everything we can," Sarah assured her. "The fever needs to break. Has he been able to drink any water?" "A few sips, but not much," Martha said, her eyes welling with tears. "Mercy, prepare some willow bark tea. It will help reduce the fever and ease his discomfort." As Mercy moved to comply, the door creaked open. Hester Goodwin stepped inside without invitation, her gaze sweeping over the room. "Martha," Hester said, her tone laced with concern, "I thought you might need some support." "Thank you, Hester," Martha replied hesitantly, "but we're managing." Hester's eyes settled on Sarah and then on Mercy, who was carefully measuring the willow bark. "Using more of your remedies, I see," she remarked. "Natural treatments can be very effective," Sarah said, meeting Hester's gaze steadily. "Some might say such methods are unconventional," Hester responded, "perhaps even risky." Mercy felt a flare of irritation, but bit back a retort. She could see the tension tightening in her mother's posture. "All treatments carry some risk," Sarah replied evenly. "But I've used these remedies successfully for years." Hester tilted her head slightly. "Still, in times like these, one must be cautious. There are whispers of unnatural illnesses spreading." "Whispers often lead to unfounded fears," Sarah said. "Our focus should be on healing." Before Hester could respond, Samuel let out a weak cry, drawing all attention back to him. Martha rushed to his side, panic rising in her eyes. "He's getting worse," she exclaimed. Sarah moved quickly, feeling the boy's pulse. "The fever is still high. Mercy, bring more cool water." As Mercy fetched the water, she could feel Hester's gaze burning into her back. The room seemed to close in, the air thick with suspicion as much as concern. They worked tirelessly over the next hour, but Samuel's condition remained precarious. Outside, the crowd of villagers grew, their hushed conversations seeping through the walls. At midday, Reverend Samuel Parris arrived, his austere figure casting a long shadow in the doorway. "Good day," he intoned, his eyes scanning the room. "I came to offer prayers for the boy." "Thank you, Reverend," Martha said, her voice barely above a whisper. He stepped inside, his gaze lingering on the array of herbs and tools spread out on the table. "You've been administering treatments?" "Yes," Sarah replied. "We're doing all we can to reduce his fever." Reverend Parris nodded slowly. "Prayer can be a powerful remedy as well." "Of course," Sarah agreed. Hester moved to stand beside the Reverend. "It's concerning, isn't it, how sudden these illnesses strike, almost as if there's a darker force at work." Mercy felt her chest tighten. She exchanged a quick glance with her mother, who maintained a calm exterior. "The causes of illness can be varied," Sarah said carefully. "Exposure to the elements, poor nutrition, or perhaps interference with natural order," Hester interjected pointedly. Reverend Parris stroked his chin thoughtfully. "These are troubled times. We must remain vigilant against any form of malevolence." Martha's face paled further. "What are you suggesting?" "Only that we consider all possibilities," Hester said, her eyes flicking towards Sarah. Mercy couldn't stay silent any longer. "My mother is trying to help. Accusations won't heal Samuel." "Mercy!" Sarah cautioned softly. Reverend Parris raised a hand. "No one is making accusations. We all desire the boy's recovery." "Perhaps we should allow Mistress Hale to continue her work," Martha said, desperation edging her voice. "Very well," the Reverend conceded, "but I urge caution and prayer." He led a brief prayer over Samuel, his words heavy with insinuation. As he and Hester departed, the atmosphere in the room remained tense. "Mother, this is getting out of hand," Mercy whispered once they were alone. "I know," Sarah replied, her eyes reflecting a depth of concern she rarely showed. "But we must remain focused." By late afternoon, Samuel's fever finally began to wane. His breathing steadied, and a touch of colour returned to his cheeks. Martha wept with relief, clutching Sarah's hands. "Thank you," she sobbed. "You've saved him." "Continue with the teas and keep him cool," Sarah instructed. "We'll check on him tomorrow." As they gathered their belongings to leave, Mercy noticed the crowd outside had not dispersed. Instead, more villagers had joined, their faces etched with suspicion. Thomas Putnam stepped forward as they exited the cottage. "How is the boy?" he asked. "Improving," Sarah replied. "Thanks to your remedies?" he inquired, a note of doubt in his voice. "Yes," Sarah affirmed. Hester's voice rang out from the back of the crowd. "Or perhaps despite them." A murmur rippled through the assembly. Mercy felt anger surge within her. "Why do you doubt us? We've done nothing but help." "Calm yourself, child," Thomas said sternly. "These are uncertain times. Questions must be asked." "Questions are one thing," Sarah said, her tone measured. "Baseless insinuations are another." Reverend Paris appeared beside Thomas, his expression grave. "Peace, everyone. Let us not be hasty in our judgments." "Then what do you suggest?" Hester pressed. "That we observe and pray," he replied, "and remain cautious." Mercy exchanged a glance with Eliza Putnam, who stood at the edge of the crowd. Eliza's eyes were wide with worry, her hands clasped tightly before her. "Come, Mercy," Sarah said quietly. "It's time we returned home." They walked away under the weight of countless gazes, the whispers following them like a shadow. Back at their cottage, the familiar surroundings offered little comfort. Mercy paced the length of the main room, her thoughts racing. "Mother, they're turning against us," she said finally. "What can we do?" "Stay true to ourselves," Sarah replied, setting down her satchel. "We have done nothing wrong." "But what if they don't see it that way? Hester is spreading lies, and even the Reverend seems swayed." Sarah sat down at the table, her gaze steady. "Fear makes people act irrationally. We must not let it provoke us into rash actions." Mercy stopped pacing, taking a deep breath. "Perhaps we should speak to someone, explain our side." "To whom?" Sarah asked gently. "Those who trust us need no explanation. Those who doubt will not be convinced by words alone." A knock at the door startled them both. Exchanging a wary glance, Sarah rose to answer it. Nate Foster stood on the doorstep, his expression earnest. "I heard about what happened," he said without preamble. "Are you both all right?" "We're managing," Sarah replied, stepping aside to let him in. Mercy felt a rush of relief at the sight of him. "Thank you for coming." He nodded, his gaze serious. "People are talking, spreading rumours." "We're aware," Sarah said. "It's unfair," Nate continued. "Anyone who's seen your work knows you help people." "Unfortunately, not everyone sees it that way," Sarah observed. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked. "Just being here means a great deal," Mercy said softly. They sat together discussing the day's events. Nate shared that his own family had heard the whispers but didn't believe them. "Father says it's nonsense," he assured them. "He respects your knowledge." "That's heartening to hear," Sarah replied. As evening settled in, Nate took his leave. "Please be careful," he urged at the door. "I'll do what I can to quell the rumours." "Thank you," Sarah said. "Your support is invaluable." After he left, the silence in the cottage felt heavier. Mercy lit a candle, the small flame casting flickering shadows on the walls. "Mother, what if it gets worse?" she asked quietly. "Then we face it together," Sarah replied, "with courage and integrity." Mercy sat down across from her. "I want to help more, yeah? Teach me everything so I can be of greater use." Sarah considered her for a long moment. "Very well. We'll begin your lessons in earnest. Knowledge is our ally." They spent the next hours poring over Sarah's journals, discussing the properties of various herbs and their applications. Mercy absorbed the information eagerly, her determination growing. As the night deepened, Sarah closed the last book. "It's late. We should rest." Mercy nodded, though her mind was still buzzing. "Thank you, Mother." Sarah reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "You are strong, Mercy. Never forget that." In her room, Mercy prepared for bed, but found sleep elusive. She stared out the window at the moonlit landscape, the village quiet beneath a blanket of darkness. A sudden movement caught her eye, a figure slipping between the trees at the edge of their property. Her heart quickened. Was someone watching them? She strained to see, but the figure vanished into the shadows. Unease settled over her like a cold mist. The first whispers had begun, carrying with them the threat of something far more sinister. Mercy knew then that their lives were on the cusp of irrevocable change. Returning to her bed, she pulled the covers tightly around herself, whispering a silent prayer for protection. Whatever storm was coming, she resolved to face it head on. The ties of fear and superstition would not bind her spirit. As she finally drifted into a restless sleep, the night seemed to hold its breath, the village suspended in a fragile calm before the tempest to come. Letter from Martha Carter to Reverend Samuel Parris. November 15th, 1691. Reverend Parris, I write to you with a troubled heart, knowing full well that some among us stray from his light. My sister Abigail's death haunts me still, a reminder of those who tread paths not meant for godly women. Sarah Hale's household, it seems, has found in their herbs and roots a kind of freedom that leaves the rest of us uneasy. I beseech you to offer guidance, for I fear that our good village may be led into spiritual dangers by those who ignore the Scriptures. Abigail was among them once, and I cannot allow another soul to risk the wrath of divine retribution. Yours in faith, Martha Carter. Chapter 4. The Accusation. Mercy Hale jolted awake to the sound of fists pounding against the front door, each thud more insistent than the last. Her heart raced as she sat upright, the remnants of sleep clinging to her like a shroud. Shadows danced eerily across the walls of her small bedroom, cast by the dying embers in the hearth. The pre-dawn darkness enveloped the house, making the intrusion all the more jarring. "Mother!" she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. From the adjacent room she heard her mother, Sarah, stir. "Stay where you are, Mercy," Sarah instructed firmly, her tone betraying a mix of caution and urgency. Ignoring the command, Mercy threw off her quilt and hurriedly pulled on her shawl, her bare feet silent against the wooden floor as she moved toward the commotion. The pounding intensified. "Open in the name of the law," a gruff voice demanded from the other side of the door. Sarah reached the entryway just as Mercy arrived at her side. With a resolute breath, Sarah unlatched the heavy wooden door. It swung open to reveal a group of stern-faced men illuminated by the flickering light of torches. At their forefront stood Constable Jonathan Hathorne, his eyes cold beneath the brim of his hat. Beside him loomed Deputy Samuel Sibley, clutching a rolled parchment sealed with the magistrate's crest. "Sarah Hale," Constable Hathorne announced, his voice cutting through the silence of the early morning. "By order of the General Court of Massachusetts Bay Colony, you are hereby placed under arrest for the suspicion of witchcraft and consorting with the devil." Mercy's breath caught in her throat. "What?" she gasped, stepping forward. "This is absurd." Sarah placed a protective arm across Mercy's chest, gently restraining her. "On what grounds do you make this accusation?" Sarah asked steadily, meeting the constable's gaze without flinching. Deputy Sibley unrolled the parchment, his hand steady. "Multiple affidavits have been sworn against you," he stated, "including testimony from goodwife Martha Carter." At the mention of her name, Martha Carter stepped forward from the shadows, her face etched with a mix of sorrow and determination. "Mistress Hale," she began, her voice quivering slightly, "since your visit, my daughter lies near death. Unnatural signs afflict her, fits and visions that can only be the work of dark forces." Sarah's eyes softened. "Martha, I did everything within my power to help your child. I used only the remedies passed down through generations." "Remedies or curses?" a sharp voice interjected. Hester Goodwin emerged from the gathering crowd, her eyes gleaming with vindication. "We've all heard whispers of your unnatural practices." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. a sea of faces marked by fear and suspicion. Mercy scanned the crowd, her desperation mounting. "You all know my mother," she implored. "She's healed your wounds, eased your pains." Constable Hathorn raised a hand to silence her. "Enough. The court will hear all evidence. For now, Sarah Hale must come with us." 2 of the constable's men stepped forward, iron shackles glinting in the torchlight. They moved to seize Sarah's wrists. "Wait!" Mercy cried, grabbing her mother's arm. "You can't do this!" "Stand aside, girl," Deputy Sibley warned, his expression stern. "Obstructing justice is a punishable offence." Sarah turned to Mercy, her eyes filled with a calm resolve. "Listen to me," she said softly. "You must be strong. Trust that the truth will prevail." Tears blurred Mercy's vision. "But, Mother—" "Go to Patience Warren," Sarah whispered hurriedly. "She will know what to do." Before Mercy could respond, the men pulled Sarah away, fastening the shackles around her wrists. The harsh clink of metal echoed ominously. As they led her toward the waiting cart, the crowd parted like a tide, a mix of awe and dread evident in their faces. "Make way for the prisoner," Constable Hathorn commanded. Mercy pushed through the throng, desperate to stay close. She caught sight of Eliza Putnam standing beside her parents. Eliza's eyes were wide with horror, her hands clasped tightly together. "Eliza!" Mercy called out, reaching toward her friend. Thomas Putnam stepped forward, blocking her path. "Stay back, Mercy," he said firmly. "This is not the time." "Please, Mr. Putnam," Mercy pleaded. "You know my mother is innocent." He avoided her gaze. "The court will determine the truth." Eliza tried to move toward Mercy, but her mother, Anne Putnam, gripped her arm tightly. "Come, Eliza," Anne insisted. "We mustn't involve ourselves." "Eliza!" Mercy cried again, but her friend was pulled away, her expression stricken but powerless. A hand settled on Mercy's shoulder. She turned to see Nate Foster, his face set with grim determination. "I'm here," he whispered. "Do something," she begged him. "They can't take her." Nate shook his head. "We can't stop them now, but we can fight this. I'll stand by you." Before she could reply, Hester Goodwin's voice rang out. "Best be wary of the company you keep, Nathaniel," she cautioned. "Associating with the accused could cast doubt upon your own character." Nate glared at her. "I have no time for baseless gossip," he retorted. Hester's eyes narrowed. "Baseless? The devil hides in plain sight, and those who consort with his servants will share their fate." Mercy felt a surge of anger. "You're the one sowing fear and discord," she shouted. "How dare you twist kindness into wickedness?" Gasps erupted from the crowd. Reverend Samuel Parris stepped forward, his black robes billowing. "Enough!" he commanded, his voice authoritative. "This outburst serves no one." Mercy met his stern gaze. "Reverend Parris, you must see the injustice in this." He regarded her solemnly. "The courts will discern justice, child. We must have faith in our laws and in God's will." "Come, Mercy," Nate urged gently. "Let's leave this place." She hesitated, her eyes following the cart as it rumbled away, carrying her mother toward the jail. The stark reality pressed upon her. She was powerless to stop them. "Very well," she whispered, allowing Nate to guide her through the dispersing crowd. As they walked, whispers trailed after them. "Like mother, like daughter," someone muttered. "Best keep your distance," another warned. "Who knows what curses they carry?" Mercy kept her head high, refusing to let their words break her. But inside a storm of emotions churned, fear, anger, and a deep sense of betrayal. They reached the edge of the village square where the din of the crowd faded. Nate turned to face her, his expression gentle but resolute. "We need a plan," he said. "Rushing headlong will only make matters worse." She nodded numbly. "I don't even know where to begin." "First, let's get you somewhere safe," he suggested. "You shouldn't be alone." Mercy shook her head. "I won't hide. I need to see my mother." He hesitated. "They won't allow visitors until after the initial hearing, but perhaps we can send word through someone." "Patience, Warren," Mercy recalled. "Mother said to go to her." Nate considered this. Patience is wise and well respected by some. She might have ideas. "Will you come with me?" she asked. "Of course," he agreed without hesitation. They set off toward the outskirts of the village, where Patience Warren lived in a modest cottage nestled among ancient oaks. As they walked, the sky began to lighten, the first rays of dawn piercing the horizon. The world seemed indifferent to her plight, the beauty of the morning a stark contrast to the turmoil within her. Reaching Patience's home, Mercy knocked urgently on the weathered door. After a moment it creaked open to reveal the healer's kind but weary face. "Mercy," Patience said softly, "I heard the news." "Please, I need your help," Mercy implored. Patience ushered them inside. "Come in. There's much to discuss." The interior of the cottage was warm and fragrant, filled with the scent of dried herbs and burning sage. Shelves lined the walls, cluttered with jars and bottles of various concoctions. "Tell me everything," Patience urged, guiding Mercy to a chair. Mercy recounted the events, her words tumbling over one another in her haste. Patience listened attentively, her expression grave. "This hysteria is spreading faster than I feared," Patience murmured. "Reason has fled Salem." "What can we do?" Mercy asked desperately. "How can we prove my mother's innocence?" Patience tapped her fingers thoughtfully against the table. "We need to gather testimonies from those she's helped, build a case to present to the magistrates." "Who would be willing to speak out?" Nate questioned. "Fierce silences many." "Agnes Fuller, perhaps," Patience suggested. "She respects your mother and understands the healing arts." "I can try to speak with her," Mercy agreed. "Also, we must find any evidence that contradicts the accusations," Patience continued. "If we can show that Martha Carter's daughter was ill before Sarah visited, it could help." Nate leaned forward. "I might be able to gather information, discreetly, of course." "Time is of the essence," Patience warned. "The court moves swiftly in these matters." Mercy felt a flicker of hope. "Thank you, both of you. I don't know what I'd do without your support." Patience reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "We stand together in this." "Stay here for now," Patience advised. "It's safer than returning home." Mercy hesitated. "I can't hide. People already view me with suspicion. If I disappear, it will only fuel their fears." "She's right," Nate concurred. "But you shouldn't be alone. I'll accompany you." Patience nodded. "Very well, but be cautious, and remember the smallest misstep could be twisted against you." Mercy and Nate left the cottage, the morning sun now casting a golden hue over the village. Despite the beauty of the day, an undercurrent of dread permeated the air. As they walked back toward the centre of town, they noticed clusters of villagers engaged in hushed conversations. Eyes followed them, some filled with pity, others with distrust. "Let them stare," Mercy muttered. Nate glanced at her. "We must tread carefully." They approached the home of Agnes Fuller, the midwife known for her discretion and compassion. Mercy knocked gently on the door. Agnes answered, her grey eyes studying them intently. "Mercy," she greeted with a nod, "I was expecting you." "You've heard?" Mercy asked. Agnes stepped aside to let them in. "News travels quickly in Salem, especially ill news." Inside, the room was tidy and unadorned, the simplicity reflecting Agnes's practical nature. "I need your help," Mercy began earnestly. "Will you testify on my mother's behalf?" Agnes sighed heavily. "Your mother is a good woman. I've no doubt of her innocence." "Then you'll speak for her?" Nate prompted. Agnes hesitated, her gaze dropping to her clasped hands. "I fear my words may carry little weight. The court looks unfavourably upon those of us who practice the healing arts." "All the more reason we must stand together," Mercy urged. Agnes met her eyes. "I must consider the safety of my own family." Frustration welled within Mercy, but she fought to keep her tone measured. "If we don't act, more innocent people will suffer." Agnes's expression softened. "You're brave, child. Perhaps braver than I. I will do what I can." "Thank you," Mercy said, relief mingling with lingering apprehension. Leaving Agnes's home, they continued their quest, but each encounter yielded similar results. Many sympathised, but were reluctant to involve themselves. Fear had cast a suffocating pall over the village, choking the bonds of community. As the day wore on, Mercy's hope began to wane. They returned to her home, exhaustion pressing upon them. "Rest for a while," Nate suggested. "We'll think of another approach." She sank into a chair by the hearth. "I feel like I'm failing her," she confessed. "You haven't," he assured her. "Your mother would be proud of your efforts." "Would she?" Mercy mused bitterly. "I've accomplished so little." A soft knock at the door startled them. Exchanging a wary glance, Nate moved to answer it. Eliza stood on the threshold, her face flushed. "May I come in?" she asked tentatively. "Of course," Mercy replied, rising to greet her. Eliza stepped inside, wringing her hands nervously. "I had to see you. I feel terrible about earlier." "It's all right," Mercy said, though the memory still stung. "No, it's not," Eliza insisted. "I should have stood by you." "Your parents," Mercy began. "I don't care what they think," Eliza interrupted. "You're my friend." Mercy felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you." Eliza took a deep breath. "I overheard my father speaking with Reverend Paris. They plan to hold the preliminary hearing tomorrow." "That's soon," Nate exclaimed. "Yes," Eliza confirmed. "They're determined to make an example." Mercy's heart sank. "We need more time." Eliza glanced around nervously. "There's something else? I heard them mention a book. A ledger of sorts that my father keeps. It contains notes on the villagers, their dealings." "Why is that important?" Mercy asked. "If we could find it, perhaps there's information that could help you," Eliza suggested. "Or at least expose inconsistencies." Nate frowned. "It's risky if we're caught." "I know," Eliza acknowledged, "but it's a chance." Mercy considered the proposition. "Do you know where it's kept?" "In my father's study," Eliza revealed. "I can get it tonight." "Eliza, that's dangerous," Mercy cautioned. "I won't stand by while injustice prevails," Eliza declared. "You're taking a great risk," Nate agreed, "but it could make a difference." "Then it's settled," Eliza said. "I'll bring it to you as soon as I can." "Thank you," Mercy said earnestly. Eliza offered a determined smile. "We'll get through this together." After she left, Mercy turned to Nate. "Do you think this will work?" "It's a long shot," he admitted, "but any leverage could help." As night fell, they prepared for what lay ahead. Mercy brewed a pot of herbal tea, the familiar ritual offering a semblance of comfort. "Get some rest," Nate advised. "I'll keep watch." "You don't have to stay," she told him. "I won't leave you alone," he insisted. Too weary to argue, she nodded. "Thank you." She settled into her bed, though sleep remained elusive. The weight of the day's events pressed heavily upon her, But amidst the turmoil, a thread of hope persisted. Her mother had always taught her to find strength within, to stand firm in the face of adversity. Clinging to that wisdom, Mercy closed her eyes, willing herself to rest. In the quiet of the night, the village seemed deceptively peaceful, yet beneath the surface tensions simmered, threatening to erupt. Mercy knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she was no longer alone. With allies by her side, she resolved to fight for justice, no matter the cost. As she drifted into a fitful sleep, one thought remained clear. She would not let fear extinguish the light of truth. Letter from Nathaniel Nate Foster to Thomas Hale. July 18th, 1689. Dear Mr. Hale, I thank you for allowing me to join you in your workshop, and for the guidance you have offered a young man eager to learn. Your stories of distant lands and the diverse knowledge you carry are both inspiring and humbling. It is not only the carpentry I've learned under your watch, but a way of thinking, of seeing beyond what lies in plain view. Your daughter, Mercy, is particularly fortunate to have such a father, and I shall endeavour to be a friend worthy of the wisdom you've shared. In respect and gratitude, Nathaniel Foster. Chapter 5. Seeds of Doubt. Mercy. Hale stood before the imposing iron gates of Salem's jail, her hands clenched tightly around a basket filled with fresh bread and herbs. The sight of the grim structure sent a chill down her spine, but she forced herself to take a steadying breath. The sun had barely risen, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out and grasp at her skirts. She couldn't afford to be afraid, not now. A burly guard eyed her suspiciously as she approached. "State your business," he demanded, his voice gruff. "I'm here to see my mother, Sarah Hale," Mercy replied, lifting her chin to meet his gaze. "I have permission from Magistrate Hathorn." He scrutinized her for a moment before grunting and unlocking the heavy gate. "You've got 15 minutes, he said curtly. "Don't try anything foolish." "Thank you," she murmured, slipping past him into the dimly lit corridor beyond. The stench hit her immediately, a nauseating blend of damp straw, unwashed bodies, and the lingering scent of despair. Mercy pressed a handkerchief to her nose, her eyes watering as she navigated the narrow passageway lined with cells. In the flickering light of torches mounted on the walls, she caught glimpses of haggard faces peering out from behind iron bars. At the end of the corridor, she found her mother seated on a rough wooden bench inside a small cell. Despite the harsh conditions, Sarah Hale held herself with quiet dignity, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Mother," Mercy whispered, her voice catching in her throat. Sarah looked up, a soft smile touching her lips. "Mercy, my dear, I was hoping you would come." "I brought you some bread," Mercy said, slipping it through the gap between the bars. "And herbs from our garden." "Thank you," Sarah replied, accepting the offerings gratefully. "How are you holding up?" Mercy hesitated, not wanting to burden her mother with her own troubles. "I'm managing," she said carefully. "But I'm more concerned about you. This place, it's unbearable." Sarah reached through the bars to gently touch Mercy's cheek. "Do not fret over me. You must take care of yourself." "I can't just stand by while they keep you here," Mercy insisted, her eyes filling with tears. "I've been trying to gather support, but everyone turns me away." Her mother sighed softly. "Fear has gripped this town. People are quick to turn on those they once called friends." "Why did Martha Carter accuse you?" Mercy asked, frustration evident in her tone. "There must be a reason." A shadow passed over Sarah's face. "There are old wounds, my child. things left unresolved. "Then help me understand," Mercy pleaded. "I found letters in your trunk, correspondence with someone named Abigail, and mentions of Martha and Hester Goodwin." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "You should not have read those." "I had to," Mercy insisted. "If there's something that can prove your innocence—" "Mercy," her mother interrupted gently. "Some truths are more dangerous than lies. You must be careful." Before she could press further, the guard's footsteps echoed down the corridor. "Time's up," he barked. "Visiting hours are over." "I'll be back soon," Mercy promised, squeezing her mother's hand. "Stay safe," Sarah whispered, "and trust no one." As the guard escorted her out, Mercy's mind raced with questions. What secrets was her mother keeping? And how were they connected to the accusations tearing their lives apart? Outside, the morning air was crisp, but the usual bustle of village life seemed muted. As Mercy walked through the streets, she felt the weight of countless eyes upon her. Conversations hushed as she passed, and familiar faces turned away to avoid her gaze. "That's her," she heard someone whisper. "The healer's daughter." "Best keep your distance," another replied. "You never know." Mercy's heart ached at the coldness surrounding her. Determined not to let it deter her, she made her way to Goody Proctor's home. Perhaps the woman her mother had helped so many times would be willing to offer support. She knocked softly on the door, and after a moment it creaked open a few inches. "Mercy," Goody Proctor greeted, her expression wary. "What brings you here?" "May I come in?" Mercy asked hopefully. The older woman hesitated. "I'm not sure that's wise," she said, casting a nervous glance over her shoulder. "People are talking." "Please," Mercy implored, "I need your help." Goody Proctor sighed and opened the door just enough for Mercy to slip inside. The warmth of the hearth did little to ease the chill in the atmosphere. "I won't stay long," Mercy promised. "I was hoping you might speak on my mother's behalf. You know she's innocent." Goody Proctor wrung her hands, avoiding Mercy's eyes. "I wish I could, dear, but with all that's happening—" "You're afraid," Mercy said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just me," the woman replied defensively. "I have my family to think of. If I step forward, they might come after us next." "Don't you see that's exactly why we must stand together?" Mercy argued. "If we let fear control us, no one is safe." "I'm sorry," Goody Proctor said firmly. "I can't help you." Mercy felt a lump rise in her throat. "I understand," she managed, turning toward the door. "Thank you for your time." Back on the street, the sense of isolation pressed heavier upon her. Each rejection was a blow, but she refused to give up. She decided to visit Patience Warren, another healer and perhaps her mother's closest friend. As she approached Patience's cottage on the outskirts of the village, she noticed the shutters were closed tight. Mercy knocked softly, but there was no answer. "Patience," she called quietly. "It's Mercy." After a long moment, the door opened a crack, and Patience's eyes peered out. "Come inside quickly," she whispered. Once inside, Mercy saw that the usually tidy home was in disarray, herbs and scrolls scattered across the table. "What's going on?" Mercy asked, concern evident. "I fear they're coming for me next," Patience confided, her voice shaking. "I've heard rumours." "Then we must act fast," Mercy urged. "Will you help me prove my mother's innocence?" Patience hesitated. "It's dangerous, Mercy. They're looking for any excuse to accuse others." "My mother told me to trust you," Mercy insisted. "She said you might have answers." Patience glanced around nervously before nodding. "Very well, but we must be cautious." They sat down at the cluttered table, and Patience began to explain. "Years ago, your mother, Martha Carter, Hester Goodwin and I formed a circle to study healing and herbalism more deeply. We sought to help the village with our knowledge." "Then why would Martha and Hester turn against her?" Mercy asked. "Ambition," Patience replied bitterly. "Hester craved power and influence. When your mother opposed her more questionable methods, tensions grew." "What kind of methods?" "Rituals that bordered on the forbidden," Patience said grimly. "Your mother wanted no part of it." Mercy thought of the letters she'd found. "And Martha?" "She was easily swayed," Patience explained. "Hester manipulated her fears." "Do you have any proof of this?" Mercy inquired. "Something we could show the magistrates?" Patience shook her head. "Most of our records were destroyed when we disbanded, but perhaps if we could find Hester's journal—" "Where would it be?" "She keeps it hidden, but I might know where," Patience said thoughtfully. "In the old meeting place near the woods." Mercy's mind raced. "I'll find it." "No," Patience objected. "It's too dangerous. If you're caught—" "I have nothing left to lose," Mercy declared. "I need to do this." Patience sighed. "Very well, but you must be careful." "I will," Mercy promised. "Thank you." As she left Patience's cottage, the weight of the task ahead settled upon her. She knew the risks, but felt compelled to uncover the truth. Later that evening, as darkness enveloped the village, Mercy prepared to venture into the woods. She donned a dark cloak and tucked a small lantern into her satchel. Just as she was about to leave, a soft knock sounded at her door. Her heart leapt into her throat. Who could it be at this hour? "Who is it?" she called cautiously. "It's me, Eliza," came the whispered reply. Mercy quickly unbolted the door to find her friend standing there, her face pale in the moonlight. "Eliza, what are you doing here?" Mercy asked, pulling her inside. "I had to warn you," Eliza said urgently. "My father and Reverend Paris are planning something. They're convinced there's a coven of witches, and they're looking for more suspects." Mercy's stomach clenched. "Do they suspect Patience?" "I believe so," Eliza confirmed, "and possibly you." "Me?" Mercy whispered, horrified. "You must be careful," Eliza insisted. "They're watching you." Mercy took a deep breath. "I'm going to find proof to clear my mother's name." Eliza's eyes widened. "What are you planning?" "I can't involve you," Mercy said firmly. "It's too dangerous." "I'm already involved," Eliza argued. "Please, let me help." Mercy considered her friend's earnest expression. "Very well, I need to find Hester Goodwin's journal. It might contain evidence." Eliza nodded. "I know where Hester keeps a spare key to her house. We could get it tonight." "Breaking into her home?" Mercy asked, apprehensive. "Do you have a better idea?" Eliza challenged gently. Mercy bit her lip. "No, I suppose not." "Then let's go," Eliza urged. They slipped into the night, moving stealthily through the deserted streets. At Hester's home, Eliza retrieved a small key hidden beneath a loose stone near the doorway. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, shadows stretching across the floorboards. They moved quickly, searching through drawers and cabinets. "Over here," Eliza whispered, pointing to a locked chest. Mercy tried the key, but it didn't fit. "We need to find another way." "Stand back," Eliza instructed. She produced a small hairpin and began to fiddle with the lock. "Where did you learn that?" Mercy asked, surprised. Eliza offered a wry smile. "I've picked a few locks in my time." With a soft click, the chest opened, revealing an array of documents and a leather-bound journal. "That's it," Mercy said, reaching for the book. Footsteps sounded outside and both girls froze. "Someone's coming," Eliza hissed. They quickly closed the chest and hid behind a heavy curtain just as the front door creaked open. Hester's voice carried into the room. "I tell you, they're plotting against us," she said sharply. Another voice replied, Martha Carters, we need to be careful if they find out about our involvement. Relax, Hester scoffed. By the time they piece anything together, it will be too late. Mercy exchanged a shocked glance with Eliza. The two women moved into the adjoining room, their conversation fading. Now, Mercy mouthed. They slipped out from their hiding place and made their way back to the door. Just as they reached it, a floorboard creaked beneath Eliza's foot. "Who's there?" Hester demanded. Without hesitation, the girls bolted into the street, running as fast as their legs could carry them. They didn't stop until they reached Mercy's home, both of them gasping for breath. "That was too close," Eliza panted. "But we have the journal," Mercy said, holding it up triumphantly. Inside, they lit a candle and began to sift through the pages. The journal detailed Hester's manipulations, her plans to accuse Sarah and others to divert suspicion from herself. "This is it," Mercy said, her eyes scanning the incriminating passages. "Proof of their deceit." A sudden thud against the door startled them. Mercy moved cautiously to pick up a folded note that had been pushed underneath. "Another one?" Eliza asked nervously. Mercy unfolded it, her blood running cold at the message. "Your time is running out. Stay silent or face the consequences." Eliza's face paled. "They know." Mercy set her jaw. "Let them come. We have what we need." "You can't be serious," Eliza protested. "They won't hesitate to harm you." "I won't cower," Mercy declared. "Not when the truth is within reach." Eliza placed a hand on her arm. "We'll go to the magistrate first thing in the morning, together." Mercy nodded, grateful for her friend's unwavering support. "Thank you, Eliza. I couldn't have done this without you." As they settled in for the night, the weight of their discovery hung heavily in the air. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but Mercy felt a renewed sense of purpose. She thought of her mother's parting words. Trust no one. Yet here was Eliza, risking everything to stand by her side. Perhaps not all bonds were broken. The morning light would bring new challenges, but Mercy was prepared to face them head on. The seeds of doubt sown by fear and betrayal were beginning to yield truths that could not be silenced. As dawn approached, she whispered a silent vow. "I will see justice done, no matter the cost." Chapter 6. Hidden Motives. Mercy crouched behind the stone wall bordering Martha Carter's property, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might betray her presence. She watched as Martha exited her cottage, basket in hand, and set off down the winding path toward the village. The moment the door latched behind Martha, Mercy knew she had a narrow window to uncover the truths that had been eluding her. The letters she'd found among her mother's possessions hinted at a tangled past between the Hale and Carter families, a past that might explain Martha's vehement accusations. Mercy had to know what drove Martha to such lengths, even if it meant trespassing into dangerous territory. She waited until Martha's figure disappeared among the trees before making her move. Slipping through a gap in the hedge, Mercy approached the cottage with cautious steps, her eyes darting to and fro for any sign of onlookers. The weight of the key she'd fashioned, an old hairpin bent just so pressed against her palm, a silent reminder of the risks she was taking. The cottage door was sturdy but old, and the lock yielded to her makeshift key with a soft click. Stepping inside, she was enveloped by the scent of dried lavender and beeswax. The interior was modest yet orderly, each object in its place. Mercy knew she had little time. She needed to find any documents that could shed light on Martha's motives. She moved quickly to a writing desk tucked against the far wall. Rifling through the drawers, she found mundane household accounts and correspondence that offered no insight. Frustration gnawed at her until she noticed a small wooden box secured with a simple latch. Opening it, Mercy discovered a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The handwriting on the top envelope was elegant and familiar. It matched the letters she'd found in her mother's trunk. Her pulse quickened as she untied the ribbon and began to read. "Dearest Martha," the first letter began, "I write with a heavy heart. Abigail's condition worsens by the day, and I fear conventional remedies may not suffice." Abigail. The name resonated like a distant echo. Mercy recalled mentions of an Abigail in her mother's old letters, a woman whose fate seemed entwined with their own. She read on, each letter unravelling more of the story. Abigail was Martha's younger sister, a vibrant woman with a keen interest in healing arts. She and Sarah Hale had formed a close bond, sharing knowledge and experimenting with herbal remedies that went beyond accepted practices. But when Abigail fell gravely ill, their endeavours took a tragic turn. Another letter caught Mercy's eye, written by Martha to her mother. "Sarah, your reckless pursuits have led my sister down a perilous path. I hold you responsible for her suffering. Cease all contact with my family." Mercy felt a chill run down her spine. The letters painted a picture of friendship turned sour, of blame festering into something darker. Abigail had died under mysterious circumstances, and Martha had never forgiven Sarah, harbouring resentment that had now erupted into open hostility. A sudden creak of floorboards snapped Mercy back to the present. Footsteps approached from the rear of the cottage. Panic surged through her veins. She hurriedly replaced the letters, closed the box, and slipped into a small pantry just as the back door opened. Through the narrow gap between the door and the frame, Mercy saw Martha enter, her expression wary. Had she forgotten something? Mercy held her breath, willing herself to become invisible. Martha set her basket on the table and glanced around the room, suspicion etched on her face. "Is someone there?" Martha called out, her voice edged with tension. Mercy's heart thundered. She couldn't afford to be caught. The consequences would be dire. As Martha took a step toward the pantry, a knock sounded at the front door, causing both women to freeze. "Goody Carter, are you home?" a voice called. Martha hesitated before turning away to answer the door. Seizing the opportunity, Mercy slipped out of the pantry and edged toward the back door, her movements swift and silent. She slipped outside and ducked behind a rain barrel, just as Martha returned to the kitchen, engaged in conversation with her visitor. "Thank Providence," Mercy whispered, her breath ragged. She waited until the voices faded before making her escape through the garden and back to the cover of the woods. Safely hidden among the trees, she allowed herself a moment to collect her thoughts. The revelations about Abigail were significant. Understanding Martha's grief and lingering resentment added a new dimension to the accusations against her mother. But how could she use this information to prove Sarah's innocence? Determined to find answers, Mercy decided to seek out Agnes Fuller, the midwife who had been present during Abigail's final days. Agnes was known to be discreet, and perhaps she held pieces of the puzzle that could help. The path to Agnes's cottage was a familiar one, winding through thickets of wild flowers and over a small brook that babbled cheerfully despite the gravity of Mercy's mission. As she approached, she saw Agnes tending to a herb garden, her silver hair pulled back beneath a simple cap. "Agnes," Mercy called softly. The older woman looked up, surprise flickering across her lined face. "Mercy Hale, what brings you here at this hour?" "I need to speak with you," Mercy replied, glancing over her shoulder. "It's urgent." Agnes wiped her hands on her apron and gestured toward the cottage. "Come inside." Once seated at the worn wooden table, Mercy wasted no time. "I found letters between my mother and Martha Carter about Abigail's illness. I believe Martha is using old grievances to fuel her accusations." Agnes's eyes clouded. Those were dark times. Abigail's death weighed heavily on many hearts. "Please," Mercy implored, "tell me what you know. It could help prove my mother's innocence." Agnes sighed deeply, her gaze distant. "Abigail was a gifted healer. Much like your mother, they shared knowledge that went beyond what was deemed acceptable. When Abigail fell ill, they tried remedies unfamiliar to most. Some saw this as meddling with forces best left alone." "Were these remedies dangerous?" Mercy asked. "Not inherently," Agnes replied, "but fear and ignorance breed suspicion. When Abigail passed, Martha was inconsolable. She needed someone to blame, and your mother became the scapegoat." "Do you believe my mother was at fault?" Agnes shook her head firmly. "No. Illnesses like Abigail's were often fatal, regardless of the healer's skill. Your mother did all she could." "Then why would Martha wait until now to act on her resentment?" "Perhaps the current hysteria in Salem has given her the opportunity she lacked before," Agnes suggested. "Old wounds reopened by the fear gripping our community." Mercy absorbed this, her mind racing. "Is there any proof that could exonerate my mother? Something that shows Martha's accusations are driven by personal vendetta?" Agnes hesitated. "There is one thing. Before Abigail died, she wrote a letter absolving your mother of any blame. She believed her fate was sealed by the illness, not by their practices." "Do you have this letter?" Mercy asked eagerly. "I kept it safe, fearing it might be destroyed," Agnes said, rising to retrieve a small wooden box from a high shelf. She opened it and handed Mercy a delicate piece of parchment. The handwriting was shaky but legible. "To whom it may concern, I, Abigail Carter, declare that Sarah Hale bears no responsibility for my afflictions. She has been a steadfast friend and healer. Any fault lies not with her, but with the will of God. Abigail Carter." Tears welled in Mercy's eyes. This could change everything. "Be cautious," Agnes warned. "Martha will not take kindly to her sister's words, contradicting her own narrative." "I understand," Mercy said, carefully folding the letter. "Thank you, Agnes. You've given me hope." "Take care, child," Agnes said gently. "These are treacherous waters you're navigating." Leaving the cottage, Mercy felt a renewed sense of purpose. With Abigail's letter, she had tangible evidence that could challenge Martha's claims, but she needed to act swiftly. As she made her way back toward the village, the sky began to darken with the approach of evening. The weight of the letter in her pocket was both comforting and ominous. She decided to consult with Elias Proctor, the deputy who had shown skepticism about the trials. If she could convince him to consider this new evidence, perhaps he could influence the magistrates. Reaching the outskirts of the village, she was careful to avoid the main thoroughfares, slipping instead through alleyways and back paths. The last thing she needed was to draw unwanted attention. Just as she turned a corner near the blacksmith's shop, a hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. Mercy stifled a scream as she was pulled into a narrow gap between buildings. "Easy, it's me," Nate whispered, releasing his grip. "Nate, you startled me," Mercy exhaled, relief washing over her. "Sorry," he said, his eyes scanning the street behind her. "I've been looking for you. Word is that Martha knows someone broke into her cottage. She's accusing you." Mercy's stomach lurched. "She saw me, but I had no choice." "What were you thinking?" Nate asked, concern etched on his face. "I found letters that prove Martha's vendetta against my mother stems from her sister's death," Mercy explained hurriedly. "And I have a letter from Abigail herself absolving my mother." Nate's eyes widened. "That's significant." "I need to get this to Elias Proctor," she said. He might be able to help. "Let me come with you," Nate offered. "It's not safe for you to be out alone." Mercy hesitated, but then nodded. "Thank you." They moved cautiously through the village, keeping to the shadows. As they approached Elias's residence, Mercy noticed a group of townsfolk gathered near the meeting house, their voices raised in fervent discussion. "Something's happening," Nate observed. "We need to hurry," Mercy urged. They reached Elias's door and Mercy knocked softly. After a tense moment, the door opened a crack and Elias peered out. "Mercy, what are you doing here?" he asked, surprised. "I have new evidence," she said urgently. "May we come in?" Elias glanced around before opening the door wider to admit them. Once inside, Mercy presented Abigail's letter. Elias read it carefully, his expression grave. "This challenges Martha's credibility," he acknowledged. "But bringing this forward could provoke backlash." "I don't care," Mercy declared. "My mother's life is at stake." Elias nodded slowly. "I will speak with Magistrate Danforth. He's more level-headed than some of the others." "Thank you," Mercy said, relief mingling with apprehension. A loud knock at the door startled them. Elias motioned for silence as he approached the door. "Deputy Proctor, open up," a voice commanded. Elias exchanged a worried glance with Mercy and Nate before opening the door. Thomas Putnam stood on the threshold, flanked by 2 constables. "We've received reports that you're harbouring a suspect," Putnam said coldly. Elias remained composed. "On what grounds?" "Martha Carter witnessed Mercy Hale fleeing from her property after committing theft," Putnam stated. "She is to be taken into custody." Mercy stepped forward. "I did nothing wrong." "That is for the court to decide," Putnam retorted. Elias raised a hand. "Mercy came to me seeking counsel. As deputy, it's within my purview to hear her out." Putnam's eyes narrowed. "Do not interfere, Elias. The law must be upheld." Nate moved to stand beside Mercy. "This is unjust. She's being targeted out of malice." "Careful, boy," one of the constables warned. "You don't want to be implicated." Elias considered his options quickly. "I will escort Mercy to the magistrate myself," he offered. "There's no need for force." Putnam seemed to weigh this before nodding curtly. "Very well, but any attempt to evade will be met with consequences." As the officials departed, Mercy turned to Elias, fear evident in her eyes. "What now?" "We need to get ahead of this," Elias said. "I'll present the letter to Magistrate Danforth immediately. Perhaps we can prevent formal charges." "I'll come with you," Nate insisted. Elias agreed. "Strength in numbers may help." They made their way to the magistrate's residence, the atmosphere in the village growing more oppressive with each passing moment. Whispers followed them, and faces peered from behind curtains, eyes filled with suspicion. At the magistrate's door they were admitted after a tense wait. Magistrate Danforth sat behind a heavy oak desk, his stern visage imposing. "Deputy Proctor, explain this intrusion," he demanded. Elias stepped forward. "Sir, new evidence has come to light regarding the accusations against Sarah and Mercy Hale." He handed over Abigail's letter. Danforth read it slowly, his expression unreadable. "This is a serious matter," Danforth said finally. "Accusations of perjury and false testimony undermine the integrity of our proceedings." "Exactly, sir," Elias agreed. "It suggests that Martha Carter's allegations are motivated by personal vendetta." Danforth leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "I will summon Martha Carter for questioning. In the meantime, Mercy Hale will remain under house arrest." "Thank you, Magistrate," Mercy said earnestly. "Do not thank me yet," Danforth cautioned. "The path ahead is fraught with challenges." As they left the magistrate's residence, Mercy felt a glimmer of hope. The truth was emerging, but the danger had not passed. "I'll escort you home," Nate said. "Be vigilant," Elias advised. "There are those who won't take kindly to this turn of events." "Understood," Mercy replied. Back at her house, Mercy and Nate paused on the doorstep. "Thank you for standing by me," she said softly. Nate smiled gently. "There's no place I'd rather be." Before she could respond, a figure emerged from the shadows. Hester Goodwin. "Bold move, Mercy," Hester sneered. "But don't think this ends here." "What are you planning?" Mercy demanded. "You'll find out soon enough," Hester replied ominously before disappearing into the night. Mercy's resolve hardened. "Let her scheme. I won't be intimidated." "You're not alone," Nate reminded her. Inside, the house felt colder, the walls closing in. Mercy knew the coming days would test her limits, but the revelations about Martha's motives and Abigail's absolution gave her strength. As she settled into a restless sleep, one thought anchored her. The truth, though buried deep, had a way of rising to the surface, and she was prepared to bring it into the light, no matter the cost. Letter from Goody Proctor to Patience Warren, February 2nd, 1692. Dear Patience, this season's chill carries with it a weight I cannot shake, and whispers fill the air like smoke. Accusations emerge like weeds, and those of us who dare speak of reason find ourselves looked upon with a quiet disfavour. I do not know what to think, and yet I feel I am called to think. I worry that soon it may be any one of us called before the magistrates, but I dare not say this aloud. I write to you as a friend, hoping that perhaps reason will outlast fear. Yours in trust, Goody Proctor. Chapter 7. Dangerous Questions. "Nate, I can't do this without you." Mercy's eyes searched his, pleading for understanding. They stood in the shadowed corner of the abandoned smithy, away from prying eyes and listening ears. The distant hum of village life continued beyond their hidden enclave, oblivious to the turmoil that churned within them. Nate sighed, running a hand through his tousled brown hair. "You realize what you're asking of me? If we're caught, if anyone even suspects, we could both be accused." "I know the risks," Mercy replied, her voice steady despite the fear that tightened her chest. "But my mother's life hangs in the balance. We have to find the truth." He looked away, the weight of her words settling between them. "My father expects me to keep my head down," he said quietly. "The Fosters have always been craftsmen, not agitators. If I defy him—" "Your family name carries respect in Salem," Mercy countered gently. "People trust you. That could make all the difference." Nate met her gaze once more, a flicker of determination igniting in his eyes. "All right," he conceded, "I'll help you, but we must be cautious. One misstep could cost us everything." Relief washed over Mercy, and she allowed herself a small smile. "Thank you, Nate. Truly." He nodded, a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "We'll start tomorrow at first light." The following morning they set out early, the fog still clinging to the cobblestone streets. Their plan was simple yet perilous. Speak to the eldest members of the community who might recall incidents from the past, incidents that could expose Martha Carter's history of false accusations and personal vendettas. Their first stop was the home of widow Abigail Turner, a woman whose memory was as sharp as the chill in the autumn air. She greeted them with a curious glance, but invited them inside her modest dwelling. "Mercy Hale and Nathaniel Foster," she remarked, settling into a creaking rocking chair. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Mercy exchanged a brief look with Nate before answering. "Widow Turner, we've come seeking your wisdom about certain matters in the village's past, specifically concerning Martha Carter." The old woman raised an eyebrow. "Martha Carter, you say? That one's been stirring the pot since she was knee-high to a grasshopper." Nate leaned forward. "We believe she may have unjustly accused Mercy's mother. We're hoping to find any information that might help clear her name." Widow Turner sighed, her gaze drifting to the flickering hearth. I recall a time when Martha set her sights on the Turner family, claimed my late husband had shorted her on a grain purchase. Nonsense, of course, but she wouldn't let it rest. "Was there any record of the dispute?" Mercy asked. The widow nodded thoughtfully. "I believe the matter was noted in the town ledger. Old Master Williams was the scribe back then. He was meticulous with such things." "Do you know where we might find those records?" Nate inquired. "They'd be in the archives at the meeting house," she replied. "But be warned, the records are guarded closely these days, what with all the hysteria." Mercy felt a surge of hope. "Thank you, Widow Turner. You've been most helpful." As they made their way back onto the street, Nate glanced over his shoulder. "We should be careful about visiting the meeting house. Reverend Paris is often about." "Agreed," Mercy said. "Perhaps we can find another way to access the records." Their next destination was the home of Elias Jennings, a retired magistrate whose advanced years had not dulled his keen mind. He welcomed them into his study, cluttered with books and scrolls that chronicled Salem's history. "Ah, the young Hale and Foster," he greeted them warmly. "What brings you to an old man's doorstep?" "We seek knowledge, Master Jennings," Mercy began. "Knowledge that might help us understand the events unfolding in our village." He gestured for them to sit. "The times are indeed troubling. Speak freely." "Do you recall any past disputes involving Martha Carter?" Nate asked. Jennings stroked his greying beard. "Martha Carter, yes, I remember handling a case where she accused a neighbour of witchcraft over a land boundary disagreement, unfounded as it turned out." "Was this recorded in the magistrate's logs?" Mercy pressed. "Indeed," he confirmed, "but those records are confidential." "Master Jennings, my mother stands accused based on Martha's testimony," Mercy implored. "We believe a pattern may exist, a pattern that could prove Martha's allegations are driven by personal grievances." He regarded them thoughtfully. "You tread on dangerous ground. Challenging an accuser, especially in these times, is fraught with peril." "We understand the risks," Nate replied, "but innocent lives are at stake." Jennings sighed heavily. "Very well, I cannot give you the records, but I can tell you this. Seek out the case of the Wilkins family. It bears similarities to your situation." "Thank you," Mercy said earnestly. "Be cautious," he warned. "Not everyone will be sympathetic to your cause." Over the next several days, Mercy and Nate continued their discreet inquiries, piecing together fragments of stories from those willing to speak. They learned of Thomas Wilkins, who had been accused by Martha of stealing livestock, a claim that was dismissed when the missing animals were found wandering near her own property. They also discovered that Martha had once targeted the O'Leary family, spreading rumours that led to their social ostracisation, all because of a petty disagreement over market stalls. As their evidence grew, so did the tension in the village. Whispers followed them wherever they went, and Mercy couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes watched their every move. One afternoon, as they pored over their notes in the quiet corner of the apothecary shop, whose owner, Mr. Whitlock, was a trusted confidant, they heard the heavy footfall of boots approaching. "Quick, hide these!" Mercy hissed, shoving the papers into her satchel. The door swung open to reveal Reverend Paris, his stern visage scanning the room. "Good day, Mr. Whitlock," he intoned. "Good day, Reverend," the apothecary replied, his tone measured. Paris's gaze fell upon Mercy and Nate. "Miss Hale, Master Foster, I wasn't aware you were acquainted with Mr. Whitlock." "We were just leaving," Nate said smoothly, rising from his seat. "Indeed," Mercy added, clutching her satchel tightly. Reverend Paris stepped aside, but as they passed he spoke again. "A word of counsel, if I may." They turned to face him, maintaining neutral expressions. "Idle minds are the devil's workshop," he said, his eyes piercing. "I trust you are both keeping yourselves occupied with wholesome pursuits." "Of course, Reverend," Nate replied. "We endeavour to serve the community in any way we can." Paris nodded slowly. "See that you do." Once outside, they exchanged uneasy glances. "He suspects something," Mercy whispered. "We need to be more discreet," Nate agreed. "Perhaps it's time we enlist additional help." That evening, Nate invited Mercy to his family's home under the guise of discussing a commission for new carpentry work. His father, James Foster, was a respected craftsman whose work adorned many of Salem's finest homes. As they entered the workshop adjacent to the main house, the scent of fresh-cut timber filled the air. James looked up from his workbench, his eyes narrowing slightly at the sight of Mercy. "Father, I was hoping to discuss a matter of importance," Nate began. James wiped his hands on a cloth. "Is that so?" "It's about the trials," Nate continued. "We believe there may be false accusations being made." His father's jaw tightened. "Careful, son, that's dangerous talk." "With respect, sir," Mercy interjected, "we have reason to believe that Martha Carter has a history of unfounded claims against others in the village." James studied her for a moment. "Sarah Hale is your mother, is she not?" "Yes, sir," he sighed. "Your mother has always been kind to our family, but challenging the proceedings could bring scrutiny upon us all. Father, we can't stand by while innocent people suffer," Nate argued. James placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "Our duty is to our family first. I won't risk our livelihood on matters that don't concern us directly." "They concern us all," Nate insisted. "What happens when accusations reach our doorstep?" An uneasy silence settled between them. Finally, James relented slightly. "What is it you propose?" "We need access to the town records," Mercy explained. "If we can present evidence to the magistrates, perhaps they will reconsider." James frowned. "The records are kept under lock and key. Only the scribe and the magistrates have access." "Do you know the scribe?" Nate asked. "Isaac Porter. I've done some work for him." "Could you arrange a meeting?" Mercy pressed. James hesitated. "I can inquire, but no promises." "Thank you, Father," Nate said sincerely. As they left the workshop, Mercy glanced at Nate. "I didn't realise how much you were risking by helping me." He offered a rueful smile. "Family expectations can be burdensome, but I won't turn away from what's right." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the weight of their shared struggle bound them closer. The following day, James Foster arranged for them to meet Isaac Porter at the meeting house under the pretense of discussing repairs to the building's structure. As the official scribe, Porter held the keys to the records they so desperately needed. "Master Porter, thank you for seeing us," Mercy began politely. He adjusted his spectacles, peering at them curiously. "James tells me you're interested in the architectural needs of the meeting house." "Yes," Nate replied smoothly. "But we also hope to discuss some of the records pertaining to property disputes." Porter frowned slightly. "Those records are confidential." "We understand," Mercy said quickly. However, we've discovered discrepancies in some land agreements that could impact several families, including our own." He regarded them skeptically. "What sort of discrepancies?" "Border definitions primarily," Nate lied. "If we could review the documents, we might resolve the issues without burdening the magistrates." Porter considered this. "Very well, but you may only view them under my supervision." "Of course," Mercy agreed. He led them to a small chamber lined with shelves, bearing leather-bound ledgers and scrolls. The musty scent of aged paper filled the air. "Which records are you interested in?" Porter asked. "Property disputes involving the Carter family," Nate said. Porter raised an eyebrow. "A contentious bunch they are, always quick to assert their claims." As he retrieved the relevant ledgers, Mercy's heart pounded. This was their chance. They spent the next hour poring over the documents, carefully noting instances where Martha Carter had filed complaints against neighbours, complaints that were often dismissed due to lack of evidence. "Fascinating patterns," Porter mused, peering over their shoulders. "Indeed," Mercy said, seizing the opportunity. "It seems Martha has a history of making unfounded accusations." He nodded slowly. "I hadn't connected the dots before. Perhaps this should be brought to the magistrate's attention." "Would you be willing to accompany us?" Nate asked. Porter hesitated. "I must remain impartial in my duties. However, I can provide copies of these records for your use." "That would be immensely helpful," Mercy said gratefully. As they left the meeting house with the copies safely tucked away, their relief was palpable. "This is it," Mercy said, her eyes shining. "This could tip the scales." Nate smiled. "We're not out of the woods yet, but it's a significant step." Their victory was short-lived. As they made their way back toward Mercy's home, they noticed a gathering crowd near the village square. The atmosphere was charged with tension. "What's happening?" Mercy whispered. They edged closer, blending into the periphery of the crowd. At the centre stood Reverend Paris and Martha Carter, flanked by several magistrates. "Citizens of Salem," Paris proclaimed, his voice booming, "it has come to our attention that certain individuals have been engaging in activities aimed at subverting the course of justice." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. "Let it be known that any who seek to undermine the court's proceedings will be met with the full force of the law," he continued. Martha stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the crowd until it settled on Mercy and Nate. A cold smile played on her lips. "She knows," Nate murmured, his grip tightening on Mercy's arm. "We need to leave," she replied, her voice barely audible. They slipped away before the gathering dispersed, the weight of impending danger pressing upon them. That night they convened at Mr. Whitlock's apothecary shop, joined by Widow Turner, Elias Jennings, and Isaac Porter. The small group huddled around a table laden with documents and candlelight. "We must act quickly," Elias urged. "The magistrates are being influenced by fear and manipulation." "We'll present the compiled evidence tomorrow," Mercy declared. "It's our best chance to save my mother and stop this madness." "Agreed," Nate said. "But we must prepare for retaliation." Mr. Whitlock placed a reassuring hand on Mercy's shoulder. "We're with you, child. We'll stand together." As the meeting adjourned, Mercy felt a mix of apprehension and determination. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but the weight of evidence they had amassed could not be ignored. Walking home with Nate, she glanced up at the stars shimmering above. "Do you think justice will prevail?" she asked softly. He looked at her, his expression gentle. "I have to believe it will, for all our sakes." She nodded, drawing strength from his conviction. "Thank you for standing by me." "Always," he replied. They parted ways at her gate, the unspoken bond between them stronger than ever. The dawn of the next day brought a heavy fog that clung to the village like a shroud. Mercy and her allies approached the courthouse, their footsteps muffled by the damp ground. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The magistrates sat behind a long table, their expressions stern. Reverend Paris and Martha Carter stood to one side, whispering among themselves. "State your business," Magistrate Hathorn commanded as they stepped forward. Elias Jennings cleared his throat. "We have come to present new evidence pertaining to the cases before the court." "Proceed," Hathorn said, eyeing them warily. Isaac Porter stepped forward, holding the compiled records. "These documents demonstrate a pattern of unfounded accusations made by Martha Carter against various members of our community." A ripple of surprise swept through the room. "This is preposterous!" Martha exclaimed. "An attempt to deflect guilt!" Mercy met the magistrate's gaze. "We only seek the truth. Lives hang in the balance." The magistrates conferred among themselves, their voices hushed. After a tense deliberation, Hathorn spoke. "We will review these documents and consider their implications. Until then, all proceedings are suspended." Relief and uncertainty washed over Mercy in equal measure. As they exited the courthouse, Reverend Paris approached them, his expression inscrutable. "You've made a bold move," he said. "Truth must prevail," Mercy replied steadily. He studied her for a long moment before nodding slightly. "We shall see." That evening, as Mercy sat by the hearth, a quiet knock sounded at the door. Opening it cautiously, she found Nate standing there, a tentative smile on his face. "I wanted to see how you were faring," he said. She stepped aside to let him in. "It's been a long day." "Indeed," he agreed, taking a seat across from her. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before he spoke again. "You were brave today," he said softly. She met his gaze. "I couldn't have done it without you." He reached across the table to take her hand. "We'll get through this together." A warmth spread through her, easing the tension of the past days. "Yes," she agreed, squeezing his hand gently. "Together." As night enveloped Salem, Mercy allowed herself a moment of quiet hope. The path to justice was fraught with peril, but with steadfast allies and the truth on their side, perhaps the dawn would bring a brighter day. Chapter 8. Betrayals. "Are you absolutely certain this will work?" Mercy Hale's voice quivered ever so slightly as she handed the worn leather satchel to Eliza Putnam, her oldest friend. They stood hidden behind the abandoned mill on the outskirts of Salem, the massive wooden wheel creaking softly in the distance. The air between them was thick with unspoken fears and fragile hope. Eliza glanced around nervously before meeting Mercy's gaze. "Trust me," she whispered. "My uncle in Boston has influence. If anyone can present your evidence to the right people, it's him." Mercy searched her friend's eyes for reassurance. "I don't know who else to turn to. The magistrates here won't listen, and time is running out for my mother." Eliza placed a reassuring hand on Mercy's arm. "We'll get her the help she needs, I promise." A faint smile tugged at Mercy's lips. "Thank you. I can't tell you how much this means to me." Eliza hesitated, her expression conflicted. "Just be careful, okay? There are rumours that Reverend Paris is becoming suspicious of those questioning the trials." "I will," Mercy assured her. "I need to get back before anyone notices I'm gone." As they parted ways, Mercy felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps with Eliza's help she could finally expose the truth and save her mother from the gallows. The next morning, the village was abuzz with an undercurrent of tension that Mercy couldn't quite place. Whispers followed her as she made her way through the marketplace, baskets clutched tightly in villagers' hands as they exchanged furtive glances. "Did you hear?" one woman murmured to another. "Reverend Paris is calling a meeting this afternoon." "They say there's been a revelation," her companion replied, eyes darting toward Mercy before quickly looking away. A knot of anxiety tightened in Mercy's stomach. She quickened her pace, eager to reach the safety of her home. Just as she rounded the corner onto her street, a firm hand grasped her shoulder. "Mercy," a familiar voice said. She turned to see Nate Foster, his brow furrowed with concern. "Nate, you startled me." "We need to talk," he said urgently, guiding her toward a secluded alleyway. "What's going on?" she asked, her pulse quickening. He glanced around before leaning in. "Word is spreading that someone has been attempting to undermine the court's proceedings. Reverend Paris is livid." Mercy's heart sank. "Do they know who?" Nate hesitated. "I overheard my father speaking with Thomas Putnam. Your name was mentioned." A wave of dread washed over her. "That's impossible. I've been careful." "Have you spoken to anyone? Shared any of your findings?" he pressed gently. Mercy thought of Eliza, the satchel of evidence now en route to Boston. I entrusted some documents to someone I thought I could trust." "Who?" Nate demanded softly, urgency in his tone. "Eliza," she confessed. "She offered to help." Nate's expression darkened. "Mercy, Eliza's father is one of Reverend Paris's closest allies. If she told him—" "She wouldn't betray me," Mercy insisted, though doubt gnawed at her. "Think about it," Nate urged. "If Reverend Paris knows about your efforts, it could only have come from someone close." Mercy shook her head, unwilling to believe it. "I need to speak with her." "That's too dangerous," he cautioned. "You should lay low until we know more." Before she could respond, the distant tolling of the church bell echoed through the village. "The meeting," Nate said grimly. "We should go, but stay on guard." The town square was a sea of stern faces as Reverend Paris ascended the steps of the meeting house. His eyes blazed with fervour as he addressed the crowd. "Good people of Salem," he began, his voice resonating with authority, "a great evil has infiltrated our midst. An insidious plot to subvert our holy mission has been uncovered." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the assembly. Mercy stood beside Nate, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might give her away. "Someone among us," Paris continued, "has conspired to undermine the very foundations of our justice, aiding those who consort with darkness." Mercy's breath caught in her throat as his gaze swept over the crowd, seeming to linger on her for a fraction too long. "Step forward, Mercy Hale," Paris commanded, his voice slicing through the hushed whispers. All eyes turned toward her. Nate grabbed her hand instinctively. "Don't," he whispered. She hesitated, her mind racing. Running would only confirm guilt in the eyes of the villagers. Summoning her courage, she released Nate's hand and stepped forward. "Yes, Reverend," she replied, striving to keep her voice steady. Paris regarded her with a cold smile. "Do you deny sending seditious materials to undermine our court?" "I don't know what you're referring to," she answered carefully. From behind Paris, Thomas Putnam stepped forward, holding up the very satchel Mercy had given to Eliza. "These documents were intercepted en route to Boston," he declared, "filled with lies intended to discredit our sacred proceedings." Shock and betrayal slammed into Mercy like a physical blow. Eliza had promised to help. How had the satchel ended up in Putnam's hands? "I entrusted those papers to a friend," she said, her voice wavering. "They contain the truth about the wrongful accusations in our village." "Truth?" Paris scoffed. "Or the devil's deceptions?" The crowd murmured, the weight of suspicion pressing in. "Mercy, Hale," Paris intoned. "You are hereby accused of conspiring against the court and abetting witchcraft. You will be taken into custody to await trial." Panic surged through her veins. She glanced around desperately, her gaze locking with Eliza's across the crowd. Eliza's eyes were filled with remorse, tears streaming down her cheeks. "How could you?" Mercy mouthed silently. Before she could react further, 2 constables advanced toward her. Nate stepped between them. "This is madness," he exclaimed. "You have no proof of any wrongdoing." "Stand aside, Nathaniel," Paris ordered. "Do not interfere with justice." "I will not let you take her without just cause," Nate insisted, his jaw set defiantly. "Your defiance is noted," Paris replied coolly. "Perhaps you too are under the devil's influence." A ripple of unease spread through the onlookers. Mercy knew they had to act fast. "Run!" Nate whispered urgently. She hesitated for a split second before breaking into a sprint, weaving through the crowd as shouts erupted behind her. "Stop her!" Paris bellowed. Nate followed close on her heels. Together they darted down narrow alleys and side streets, the commotion fading slightly with each turn. "They'll search everywhere," Mercy panted as they reached the edge of the village. "We need to get out of sight," Nate agreed. "I know a place." They hurried toward the dense thicket beyond the fields, disappearing into the embrace of the forest. As twilight settled, they arrived at an old, weathered cabin nestled among towering pines. "This was my grandfather's hunting lodge," Nate explained, pushing open the creaky door. "No one comes here anymore." Mercy stepped inside, the musty scent of aged wood enveloping them. "Thank you," she said softly, sinking onto a rickety chair. "I don't know what I would have done without you." He knelt beside her, concern etched on his face. "We'll figure this out, but we need to understand what happened." She nodded, her thoughts racing back to Eliza. "I can't believe she betrayed me." "Maybe she didn't have a choice," Nate suggested gently. "Her father is a powerful man." "She could have warned me," Mercy insisted, anger and hurt mingling in her chest. "People act out of fear," he said. "These are dangerous times." Mercy took a deep breath, steadying herself. "We still have the original evidence hidden at my home. If we can retrieve it, we might find another way to get it to someone who can help." Nate considered this. "Returning to the village is risky, but we might not have a choice." "I can't let my mother's fate be sealed because of this," she declared, resolve hardening her features. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll go together, tonight, under the cover of darkness." Night enveloped the forest as they made their way back toward Salem, the moon casting a silvery glow through the canopy. Every rustling leaf and distant sound set their nerves on edge. Approaching the outskirts of the village, they kept to the shadows, avoiding the patrols that now roamed the streets. "My house is just ahead," Mercy whispered, pointing to a modest dwelling partially obscured by overgrown shrubs. They slipped through the back garden, the familiar scent of herbs and flowers offering a brief comfort. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. "The evidence is hidden beneath the floorboards in the kitchen," she explained. As they lifted the loose plank, the sound of voices outside sent a jolt of fear through them. "Search everywhere," a gruff voice commanded. "She can't have gone far." Nate's eyes met hers, urgency mirrored in his gaze. "We need to hurry." Mercy retrieved the bundle of documents, tucking them securely into her satchel. Just as they prepared to leave, the front door creaked open. "Check upstairs," the voice ordered. Footsteps thudded against the wooden floorboards. "This way," Nate mouthed, guiding her toward the cellar door. They descended into the darkness, pulling the door closed just as a lantern's glow swept across the kitchen. Holding their breath, they listened as the searchers moved through the house. "Nothing here," one man grumbled. "Keep looking," another insisted. "Reverend Paris wants her found." Minutes felt like hours as they waited in tense silence. Eventually the footsteps receded, and the house fell quiet once more. "We can't stay here," Mercy whispered. Nate nodded. "We'll need to find a safer place to hide the evidence." "Agnes Fuller," she suggested. "She might be willing to help us again." "Are you sure we can trust her?" he asked. "She's always been kind to my family," Mercy replied, "and she has connections beyond Salem." "Then we should go now before they return." Navigating the village undetected proved increasingly challenging. Patrols were more frequent and the atmosphere was thick with suspicion. Reaching Agnes's cottage on the outskirts, they found the windows dark. Mercy knocked softly. After a moment, the door cracked open. Agnes peered out, her expression wary until she recognized them. "Mercy, Nate, what are you doing here?" she whispered, ushering them inside. "We need your help," Mercy explained, quickly recounting the events. Agnes listened intently, her brow furrowed. "You're brave to come here, but you must know the risk." "I have nowhere else to turn," Mercy admitted. "We need to get these documents to someone who can intervene." Agnes considered this. "I have a cousin in New York who could help. He has influence and could ensure the evidence reaches the right hands." "Can you send it to him?" Nate asked. "I can, but it will take time," she cautioned, "and you must stay hidden until then." Mercy glanced at Nate. "We can't keep running forever." "Perhaps there's another way," Agnes mused. "An old friend of mine is travelling to New York tomorrow. I can entrust the documents to her." "Thank you," Mercy said earnestly. "We're in your debt." Agnes gave a gentle smile. "You owe me nothing. Your mother has done much good for this village." A sudden knock at the door sent a wave of panic through them. "Open up, by order of Reverend Paris," a voice demanded. Agnes motioned for them to hide behind a heavy tapestry. She composed herself before opening the door. "Good evening," she greeted the constables calmly. "Evening, Goody Fuller," one replied. "We are searching for Mercy Hale. Have you seen her?" "Mercy Hale?" Agnes feigned surprise. "I haven't seen her since the market yesterday." The constable eyed her sceptically. "Mind if we have a look around?" "Not at all," she replied smoothly, stepping aside. As the men searched the cottage, Mercy and Nate pressed themselves against the wall, hearts pounding. "Clear!" one of the constables finally declared. "If you see or hear anything, report it immediately," the other instructed. "Of course," Agnes agreed. Once they had gone, Agnes closed the door firmly. "You need to leave," she whispered urgently. "It's too dangerous here." "Where will we go?" Mercy asked, desperation creeping into her voice. Nate squared his shoulders. "There's an old network of tunnels beneath the village, remnants from the early settlers. We can hide there." Agnes nodded. "That might be your best option for now." She handed Mercy a small locket. "Take this. It belonged to your mother. She left it with me for safekeeping." Mercy clutched the locket, emotion welling within her. "Thank you." "May it bring you protection," Agnes said softly. The entrance to the tunnels was hidden beneath an abandoned stable near the edge of town. Nate pried open the rusted hatch, the scent of damp earth rising to meet them. "Are you sure about this?" Mercy asked, peering into the darkness below. "It's our best chance," he reassured her. "I'll be right beside you." They descended into the narrow passage, the walls pressing close around them. Nate lit a small lantern, casting a faint glow that illuminated their path. As they ventured deeper, the sounds of the village faded, replaced by the steady drip of water and the echo of their footsteps. "How did you know about this place?" Mercy inquired. "My grandfather used to tell stories," Nate explained. "I never thought I'd actually need to use it." They found a small alcove where they could rest. Exhaustion weighed heavily on them both. "Do you think Agnes will succeed?" Mercy wondered aloud. "She's resourceful," Nate replied. "We have to trust that she'll get the evidence where it needs to go." Mercy sighed, leaning against the cool stone wall. "I never imagined it would come to this." He reached out, taking her hand gently. "You're not alone in this. We'll face whatever comes together." She met his gaze, gratitude and something deeper reflected in her eyes. "Thank you, Nate, for everything." He gave a small smile. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be." A comfortable silence settled between them, the weight of their circumstances momentarily lightened by their shared connection. Days passed in a blur of darkness and whispers. Agnes sent word through discreet channels that the documents were safely on their way to New York. Relief mingled with anxiety as Mercy and Nate awaited a response. Meanwhile, tensions in Salem escalated. The fervour of the witch hunts intensified, and whispers of dissent were met with swift retribution. One evening, as they prepared a meagre meal from the supplies Agnes had provided, the sound of voices echoed faintly through the tunnels. "Did you hear that?" Mercy whispered, alert. Nate extinguished the lantern. "Stay quiet." Footsteps approached, accompanied by muffled conversation. "They must be down here somewhere," a voice said. "Reverend Paris wants them found." Mercy's heart raced. They had been discovered. "Follow me," Nate urged softly, leading her deeper into the labyrinth. They navigated the twisting passages, the darkness disorienting. The voices grew louder, closing in. A dead end loomed ahead. Panic surged. "This way," Nate whispered, spotting a narrow crevice barely wide enough to squeeze through. They pressed into the tight space, the rough stones scraping against them. Holding their breath, they listened as the searchers passed by, their lantern light flickering dimly through the cracks. After what felt like an eternity, the voices faded. Mercy exhaled shakily. "That was too close," Nate nodded, tension evident in his posture. "We can't stay here. They'll keep searching." "Where can we go?" she asked, fear edging her voice. He considered their options. "We might have to leave Salem altogether. But my mother—" "Your mother would want you safe," he insisted gently. "We can send word once we're secure." She hesitated, torn between duty and self-preservation. A distant rumble interrupted her thoughts. The ground trembled slightly. "What's happening?" Mercy gasped. "An underground spring, perhaps," Nate speculated. "We need to move." As they made their way toward what they hoped was an exit, the tremors intensified. Cracks formed along the tunnel walls. "We're running out of time," he urged. They emerged into a cavern where moonlight filtered through a collapsed section above. Climbing over debris, they finally reached the surface, gulping in fresh air. The forest stretched before them, offering concealment. "Where do we go now?" Mercy asked, weary yet determined. "There's a trading post near the river," Nate suggested. "We can find passage to a safer place." She looked back toward the distant glow of Salem. "I never thought I'd have to leave my home like this." He placed a comforting arm around her shoulders. "Home is where we're together. We'll find a way." She leaned into him, drawing strength from his presence. "Thank you." They set off into the night, guided by starlight and a shared resolve. Weeks later, in a modest inn along the bustling docks of New Haven, Mercy sat by a window overlooking the harbour. Ships bobbed gently, sails billowing in the breeze. A letter lay open on the table before her, inked with familiar handwriting. "Good news?" Nate inquired. approaching with 2 steaming mugs of tea. She smiled brightly. Agnes writes that the evidence reached New York. Authorities there are questioning the legitimacy of the Salem trials. Relief washed over his features. That's a promising turn. She also says my mother has been released, pending further investigation. He grinned. See? Our efforts weren't in vain. Emotion welled within her. I couldn't have done it without you. He took her hand, his gaze sincere. We make a good team. She nodded, a sense of peace settling over her. Perhaps it's time we start anew. Wherever you wish to go, he replied. I'm by your side. She glanced out at the ships, possibilities stretching beyond the horizon. Maybe we can help others facing injustice. Use our experience to make a difference. He squeezed her hand gently. I like the sound of that. As they sat together, the sun dipping low over the water, Mercy felt hope bloom within her. Despite the betrayals and hardships, they had forged a path forward, bound by resilience and a shared purpose. The future remained uncertain, but with Nate beside her, she was ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. Chapter 9. The Truth Emerges. There's something we're missing, Mercy whispered, her eyes scanning the scattered parchments strewn across the wooden table. The dim candlelight cast flickering shadows, making the cramped attic feel even more claustrophobic. Nate sat opposite her, his brow furrowed in concentration as he sifted through a stack of letters. I agree, he replied, pushing a hand through his dishevelled hair. We've collected testimonies, letters, even court records, but the pieces don't quite fit together. There's a gap in the narrative, something that explains Martha Carter's relentless pursuit of your mother. Mercy leaned back, her mind racing. What if we're looking in the wrong places? We've focused on external evidence, but perhaps the key lies within Martha herself. Nate glanced up, curiosity piqued. You mean understanding her motivations on a personal level? Exactly, Mercy affirmed. If we could find something that reveals her true intentions, a diary perhaps, we might uncover the root of her vendetta. He nodded thoughtfully. It's risky, but if we could gain access to her home, we might find what we're looking for. Mercy hesitated, the weight of the decision heavy upon her. Breaking into Martha Carter's house was perilous, especially with tensions in Salem at an all-time high. Yet the thought of her mother languishing in a jail cell propelled her forward. I'm willing to risk it, she declared, determination hardening her voice. For my mother, and for the truth. Nate reached across the table, his hand covering hers. Then we'll do it together. Under the cloak of midnight, Mercy and Nate approached the Carter residence. The grand house stood solemnly at the end of Chestnut Street, its imposing facade silhouetted against the starless sky. The village was eerily quiet, save for the distant hoot of an owl. This way, Nate whispered, guiding Mercy toward a side gate partially concealed by overgrown hedges. I noticed this entrance when I delivered supplies here last spring. They slipped through the gate, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth. Reaching a servant's door at the rear, Nate produced a slender piece of metal, a makeshift lockpick. Where did you learn that? Mercy asked, a hint of amusement in her whisper. He flashed a brief smile. Growing up in a carpenter's household has its advantages. With a soft click, the door yielded. They stepped inside, greeted by the faint scent of beeswax and lavender. The kitchen lay before them, shadows stretching across the flagstone floor. Her study should be upstairs, Mercy murmured, recalling the house's layout from a visit years prior. They moved cautiously, the creaks of the old house amplified in the silence. Reaching the second floor, they found a door slightly ajar. Inside was a room lined with shelves of books and ledgers. a testament to Martha's meticulous nature. "Begin searching," Nate whispered. "I'll keep watch." Mercy approached the large oak desk dominating the centre of the room. Drawers revealed neatly arranged correspondence, invoices and mundane records. Frustration mounting, she almost missed a small key hidden beneath a stack of papers. Her heart quickened. Scanning the room, she spotted a modest chest tucked discreetly under a window. The key fit perfectly, and with a soft turn, the lock released. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its edges worn, pages tinted with age. "I think I found it," she breathed. Nate joined her, his eyes reflecting the gravity of the moment. "Let's take it and go." She shook her head. "We need to know what's inside now. If we're caught with it, we'll have nothing to show for our risk." Reluctantly, he nodded. "Be quick." Mercy opened the diary to the first entry, dated nearly 2 decades prior. The handwriting was elegant, yet firm, a reflection of Martha herself. March 3rd, 1672. Today, Abigail and I walked along the riverbank. She spoke of dreams beyond Salem, of places where one's worth isn't measured by lineage or adherence to rigid doctrines. Mercy's eyes darted over the entries, each one painting a vivid picture of Martha's younger sister, Abigail, a spirited soul confined by the expectations of their stern father, Thomas Carter Sr. "Listen to this," Mercy whispered. "Father forbade Abigail from seeing Isaac Turner, claiming his family lacked proper standing. She wept for hours, her heart shattered. I vowed to help her, but what can I do against Father's iron will?" Nate's expression softened. She felt powerless, trapped between loyalty to her family and love for her sister. As they delved deeper, the tone of the journal shifted. Entries became sporadic, tinged with despair. June 12th, 1673. Abigail grows weaker. The fever consumes her, and Father refuses to summon a physician, insisting prayer will suffice. I begged him to reconsider, but he struck me for my defiance. Mercy felt a lump in her throat. She was desperate to save her sister. "Wait," Nate said, pointing to a passage. "I sought out Sarah Hale in secret. Known for her healing arts, perhaps she holds the key to Abigail's recovery. If Father discovers my disobedience, there will be hell to pay." A mix of emotions churned within Mercy, empathy for Martha's anguish, and a burgeoning understanding of the tangled web that connected their families. The final entries were nearly illegible, the writing frantic. July 5th, 1673. Abigail is gone. Father blames Sarah, accusing her of witchcraft. The village whispers grow louder. I am consumed by guilt. Had I not involved Sarah, perhaps my sister would still be alive. "That's it," Mercy whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "She blames herself and, by extension, my mother." Nate placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "But that doesn't justify her actions now." Footsteps echoed faintly from the hallway below. They exchanged a panicked glance. "Someone's coming," Nate hissed. Quickly returning the journal to its place, they retreated into the shadows just as a light flickered at the doorway. Martha entered, a candle illuminating her weary face. She paused, gazing out the window with a distant expression. Mercy held her breath. The proximity to the woman who had caused her family such pain, both unnerving and surreal. As Martha turned to leave, a soft creak betrayed their presence. "Who's there?" Martha demanded, her voice sharp. Thinking swiftly, Nate stepped forward, emerging from the darkness. "It's just me, Mistress Carter." "Nathaniel Foster?" she replied, suspicion lacing her tone. "What are you doing here at this hour?" "I came to deliver the supplies you requested," he lied smoothly. "Found the door ajar and grew concerned." Her eyes narrowed. "At this hour?" He shrugged casually. Father insisted it couldn't wait. She seemed unconvinced, but nodded. Very well, leave them in the kitchen and be on your way. Of course, he agreed, backing toward the door. Good night. Once out of sight, he gestured for Mercy to follow. They slipped downstairs and out the way they came, hearts pounding until the Carter residence was safely behind them. That was too close, Mercy breathed as they reached the cover of nearby trees. Agreed, Nate replied. But we have what we need. The next morning they convened at Elias Proctor's barn, a secluded spot that had become their makeshift headquarters. Elias, ever the pragmatist, examined the journal with a critical eye. This is substantial, he admitted, but it's still Martha's private musings. The magistrates may dismiss it as emotional ramblings. Then we need corroboration, Mercy insisted. Someone who can attest to these events. Elias tapped his chin thoughtfully. Martha had a servant around that time, Lydia Thompson. She might have insights. Lydia, Mercy recalled. She left the Carter household years ago under mysterious circumstances. Precisely, Elias said. I believe she resides near the outskirts of Salem now. Determined, Mercy and Nate set out to find Lydia. The journey took them to a modest cottage nestled amid towering pines. Smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting someone was home. They knocked, and a cautious voice called out, Who goes there? Mercy Hale and Nathaniel Foster, Mercy answered. We seek Lydia Thompson. The door opened a crack, revealing a woman with kind eyes etched by lines of hardship. What brings you here? We need your help, Mercy said earnestly. It's about Martha Carter and events from years past. Lydia's expression tightened. I've put that life behind me. Please, Mercy implored. My mother's life depends on it. A flicker of empathy softened Lydia's gaze. She stepped aside. Very well, come in. Seated by the hearth, Lydia listened as they recounted their findings. When Mercy produced the journal, Lydia sighed deeply. I remember those days vividly, she began. Abigail was the light of that household, sweet and full of dreams. When she fell ill, the whole place darkened. Did Martha seek my mother's help? Mercy asked. Lydia nodded. She did, in secret. Mistress Carter believed Sarah could heal Abigail where others had failed. But Abigail passed away, Nate interjected gently. Yes, Lydia confirmed, and Master Carter was furious. He accused Sarah of witchcraft, claiming her remedies poisoned his daughter. Mercy swallowed hard. And Martha? She was torn, Lydia said softly. She adored her sister and trusted your mother, but her father's wrath was immense. Over time, I think guilt consumed her. Why did you leave the Carter household? Nate inquired. Lydia's eyes flickered with old pain. I knew too much. Master Carter wanted no loose ends. I was dismissed without reference, left to fend for myself. Would you be willing to testify? Mercy asked, hope tinging her voice. Lydia hesitated. Speaking against the Carters is dangerous. I understand, Mercy replied, but innocent lives are at stake, including my mother's. After a long pause, Lydia met Mercy's gaze. Very well, I will stand with you. Armed with new testimony, Mercy, Nate and Elias prepared to present their case to the magistrates. The stakes had never been higher. If they failed, not only would Sarah Hale be condemned, but they themselves might face dire consequences. On the eve of the hearing, Mercy sat alone beneath an ancient oak, the weight of the impending confrontation pressing upon her. Nate approached quietly, taking a seat beside her. Penny for your thoughts? He offered. She managed a faint smile. I'm just contemplating the moral complexities of all this. Martha's actions are unforgivable, yet understanding her pain adds a layer of compassion. It's a difficult balance, Nate agreed, holding someone accountable while acknowledging their humanity. Exactly, she sighed. I can't help but empathize with her loss, even as I condemn her deeds. He took her hand gently. Your capacity for empathy is one of your greatest strengths. She looked at him, gratitude shining in her eyes. I couldn't have come this far without you. He squeezed her hand. We're a team. No matter what happens tomorrow, we face it together. The courtroom was filled to capacity, the air thick with anticipation. Magistrate Jonathan Danforth presided, his stern gaze surveying those assembled. Bring forth the accused, he commanded. Martha Carter stood at the centre, her composure unshaken. Beside her, Mercy stepped forward, flanked by Nate and Lydia. Magistrate Danforth, Mercy began respectfully, we present evidence that not only exonerates my mother, but also reveals a conspiracy rooted in personal vendetta. Danforth raised an eyebrow. Proceed. Mercy recounted the contents of Martha's journal, emphasizing the coerced silence and manipulation following Abigail's death. She then called upon Lydia to testify. Lydia spoke with quiet dignity. I witnessed the events firsthand. Mistress Carter sought Sarah Hale's help out of desperation. After Abigail's passing, Master Carter's accusations were driven by grief and rage, not truth. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Martha's stoic facade began to crack. Is this true, Mistress Carter? Danforth inquired sharply. Martha's eyes flickered with a myriad of emotions, defiance, sorrow, regret. Finally, she spoke, her voice strained. Yes, it is true. Gasps echoed in the chamber. Danforth leaned forward. And what of your recent accusations against Sarah Hale? Martha's shoulders sagged. They were born of my own guilt and the festering wounds of the past. I thought that by condemning her, I could absolve myself. A heavy silence settled. Danforth turned to Mercy. Your courage in bringing this to light is commendable. Justice must prevail, Mercy replied, her gaze steady. Danforth nodded solemnly. The court will reconvene after deliberation. As they awaited the verdict, Mercy felt a tumult of emotions. The revelation had shaken the very foundations of Salem's rigid society. She wondered what the fallout would be, not just legally, but within the hearts and minds of the villagers. When the magistrates returned, Danforth addressed the assembly. In light of the evidence and Mistress Carter's confession, all charges against Sarah Hale are hereby dropped. Furthermore, an investigation into the validity of other recent accusations will commence immediately. Relief surged through Mercy, tears welling in her eyes. Nate embraced her, a smile breaking across his face. Justice, he whispered. Martha stood alone, a shadow of her former self. Mercy approached her cautiously. Thank you for telling the truth. Martha looked up, her eyes hollow. I've lost everything. You've taken the first step toward redemption, Mercy offered gently. Do you truly believe that? Martha asked, a flicker of hope in her tone. Mercy nodded. Everyone has the capacity for change. In the days that followed, Salem grappled with the repercussions. The witch trials were suspended, and a sombre reflection settled over the village. Mercy visited her mother at home, the warmth of their reunion healing wounds both visible and unseen. I'm so proud of you, Sarah said, her eyes shining. I only did what was right, Mercy replied humbly. You've grown so much, her mother observed, not just in courage, but in understanding. Mercy smiled softly. I realise now that people are complex, their actions shaped by pain and fear. It's taught me the importance of compassion alongside justice." Sarah squeezed her hand. "That's wisdom beyond your years." As Mercy left her mother's side, she found Nate waiting outside, leaning casually against the gate. "Fancy a walk?" he suggested. They strolled toward the outskirts of the village, the tension of recent events giving way to a peaceful camaraderie. "What now?" Nate asked, glancing at her. Mercy pondered the question. "I want to help heal our community, perhaps start a forum where people can share their grievances openly, preventing such bitterness from taking root again." He smiled appreciatively. "I have no doubt you'll succeed." She looked at him warmly. "And you? What's your next adventure?" He chuckled. "I think I'll stick around. Seems there's important work to be done here." Their gazes held, a silent understanding passing between them. "Thank you, Nate," she said sincerely, "for standing by me through everything." He took her hand, his expression earnest. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be." As they walked on, the path ahead seemed brighter, the shadows of the past giving way to the promise of a new beginning. Mercy felt a profound sense of growth. Not only had she fought for justice, but she had also gained a deeper appreciation for the complexities of the human heart. The truth had emerged, and with it, a chance for healing and reconciliation. Mercy was ready to embrace the future, whatever it might hold, with courage and compassion guiding her way. Letter from Magistrate Thomas Sewall to Reverend Samuel Parris. March 10th, 1692. Reverend Parris, I pen this letter with a heart burdened by the weight of our task. It is becoming apparent that we risk treading upon innocent lives, mistaking fear for guilt. More and more I find myself questioning the validity of certain claims, which often arise from grudges rather than godly cause. I urge you to consider that our roles demand discernment, and that we must not allow fervour to cloud judgment. I do not wish to overstep, but I feel compelled to speak, that we may not bring further ruin upon Salem. In cautious trust, Thomas Sewall. Chapter 10. Taking a stand. The quill hovered above the parchment, a bead of ink poised to fall and forever alter the course of Mercy's life. She took a steadying breath, her heart pounding in her ears, and pressed the tip to the paper. The words flowed cautiously at first, then with growing conviction as she penned the final piece of her case against the corruption that had taken root in Salem. "Your Excellency, the Honourable Magistrate Hathorn," she wrote, "I humbly request an audience to present evidence of grave injustices perpetrated under the guise of righteousness." Mercy paused, her gaze drifting over the stacks of documents spread across the table, testimonies from villagers, records of secret meetings, letters implicating both Martha Carter and Reverend Parris. Each page was a fragment of the truth, a whisper against the roar of authority that governed their town. Together they formed a chorus that could no longer be silenced. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called softly. The door creaked open to reveal Nate, his expression a blend of concern and determination. "I've just returned from Elias Proctor's farm," he said, stepping inside. "He's managed to secure support from several influential families. The porters, the nurses, they're willing to stand with us." Mercy's eyes widened. "The nurses! After what happened to Rebecca?" Nate nodded grimly. "Precisely because of what happened. They're tired of living under the shadow of baseless accusations. Your efforts have given them hope." She felt a flicker of relief mingled with apprehension. "This could make a real difference," she murmured, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of a parchment. He moved closer, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone in this, Mercy." A faint smile touched her lips. "I know, and I'm grateful." Another knock echoed through the modest cottage. This time Eliza stepped in, her cheeks flushed from the cold and her eyes alight with urgency. "We have a problem," she announced. Mercy and Nate exchanged a glance before turning back to her. "What is it?" Mercy asked. "Reverend Paris has called an emergency meeting of the town council tonight," Eliza explained. "Word is he's planning to preempt any petition to the magistrates by solidifying the court's authority. If he succeeds, it will be nearly impossible to challenge the trials." Mercy's stomach tightened. "He's trying to cut us off before we can even begin." "Exactly," Eliza confirmed. "We need to act quickly." Nate straightened. "Then we have to gather as many supporters as we can before the meeting. If we show unity, the council might hesitate to back him unconditionally." Mercy glanced at the clock, a relic from her father's workshop, its hands ticking steadily forward. Time was slipping away. "I'll finish drafting the petition to Magistrate Hathorn," she decided. "Eliza, can you reach out to the others? Let them know we need them tonight." Eliza nodded resolutely. "Consider it done." As she hurried out, Nate turned back to Mercy. "Are you certain about this? Challenging Reverend Paris so openly is dangerous. He's a powerful man with many allies." Mercy met his gaze firmly. "I am. If we don't stand up now, more innocent lives will be ruined." He studied her for a moment before offering a small smile. "Then let's make sure we're ready." The twilight hours found Mercy weaving through the narrow streets of Salem, her cloak pulled tightly around her against the biting chill. Lanterns flickered to life in windows and doorways, casting elongated shadows that danced along the cobblestones. The town seemed to hold its breath, aware of the undercurrents shifting beneath the surface. Her first stop was the home of Widow Thompson, a kindly woman whose son had been among the first accused. She knocked gently, and the door opened to reveal the weary face of the widow. "Mercy," Widow Thompson greeted with a faint smile. "Come in, child." "I can't stay long," Mercy replied, stepping inside just enough to avoid the draft. "I wanted to let you know we're presenting our case tonight. Your support would mean a great deal." The widow's eyes softened. "You're brave to do this. I'll be there." "Thank you," Mercy said sincerely. "Every voice matters." She continued on, visiting the Millers, the Jacobses, and others who had been touched by the trial's injustices. Each pledged their support, emboldened by Mercy's resolve. As she made her way back toward the centre of town, a figure emerged from the shadows. "Mercy Hale!" the voice called. She turned sharply, her heart leaping into her throat, only to recognise Thomas Putnam approaching. His expression was inscrutable, but his tone carried a note of caution. "A word, if you please?" "Mr. Putnam," she acknowledged warily. "I'm in a bit of a hurry." "This won't take long," he assured her. "I've heard whispers of your endeavours. It's unwise to stir dissent in such tumultuous times." Mercy squared her shoulders. "Unwise, perhaps, but necessary. Innocent people are suffering." He sighed, a hint of impatience creeping into his voice. "You're young and idealistic. You don't understand the complexities at play. The court's authority is paramount for maintaining order. Order built on fear and falsehoods is no order at all," she countered. A flicker of irritation crossed his features. "Be careful, Miss Hale. Not all are as forgiving as I." "Is that a threat?" she asked, lifting her chin defiantly. "Consider it friendly advice," he replied before turning and disappearing into the gloom. Mercy watched him go, unease settling in her chest. The entanglements of power in Salem ran deep, with families like the Putnams wielding significant influence over the town's governance and economy. Their wealth funded the militia, supported the church, and kept many families indebted to them. Shaking off the encounter, she hurried to the meeting place, a clearing behind the old mill, where a small group had gathered. Nate stood among them, speaking in low tones that ceased as she approached. "Everyone's here," he informed her. "Are you ready?" She looked around at the faces illuminated by lantern light. Elias Proctor, steadfast and stoic, Margaret Howe, her wise eyes reflecting determination, young Abigail Williams, whose accusations had ignited the trials, but now seemed filled with regret. "I'm ready," Mercy affirmed, though the weight of responsibility pressed heavily upon her. "Thank you all for coming. Together we can make a difference." Elias stepped forward. "We've discussed the risks, but we believe in your cause. The magistrates must hear the truth." Margaret placed a hand on Mercy's arm. "You carry a great burden, child, but know that we're with you." "Thank you," Mercy replied, her voice thick with emotion. Nate squeezed her hand briefly before addressing the group. "We need to move swiftly. The town council convenes in an hour, and Reverend Paris will undoubtedly try to sway them to his side." "Then let's not waste any more time," Mercy declared. The journey to the magistrates' hall was fraught with tension. As they made their way through the town square, whispers followed them. Faces peered from behind curtains, some fearful, others curious. The weight of countless eyes bore down upon them, but Mercy held her head high. At the foot of the grand building they were met by 2 constables. "Halt," one commanded. "State your business." Mercy stepped forward. "We seek an audience with Magistrate Hathorn and the council. We have urgent matters to present." The constable eyed the group sceptically. "The council is in session. No interruptions allowed." Elias produced a sealed letter. "We have a petition signed by numerous townsfolk requesting a hearing. It is within our rights." The constable hesitated, glancing at his companion. "Wait here." As he disappeared inside, Mercy's pulse quickened. Each passing moment felt like an eternity. "Do you think they'll see us?" Abigail whispered, her youthful bravado waning. "They have to," Mercy replied, more to reassure herself than the girl. The door opened again, and the constable gestured curtly. "Follow me." They ascended the stone steps, the echoes of their footsteps amplifying the gravity of the moment. Inside, the hall was dimly lit, shadows clinging to the high ceilings. At the far end, the council sat elevated behind a long table, their expressions austere. Reverend Paris stood off to the side, his gaze sharp and unwelcoming. Beside him, Martha Carter's seat was conspicuously empty. Magistrate Hathorn, a man known for his stern adherence to the letter of the law, fixed his gaze upon them. "State your purpose," he commanded. Mercy swallowed her apprehension. "Your Excellency, we come bearing evidence of grave misconduct and false accusations that have led to the wrongful imprisonment and execution of innocent townsfolk." A murmur rippled through the council members. Hathorn raised a hand for silence. "These are serious claims. What evidence do you possess?" She stepped forward, unrolling a bundle of documents. "Testimonies from respected members of the community, records of private meetings implicating Reverend Paris and Martha Carter in a conspiracy to manipulate the trials for personal gain." Reverend Paris bristled. "This is preposterous. Baseless slander from a girl desperate to save her mother," Margaret Howe interjected. "With all due respect, Reverend, we have all witnessed the fear that has gripped our town. It's time we examined the foundations of these trials." Another council member leaned forward. "Let us see these documents." Mercy handed the parchments to a clerk, who distributed them among the council. As they read, expressions shifted from skepticism to concern. Hathorn's eyes narrowed. "These letters, if authentic, suggest a severe breach of trust." "They are authentic," Elias affirmed. "We can attest to their origins." Reverend Parris's composure faltered. "You cannot seriously entertain this insurrection. It undermines the very fabric of our society." "On the contrary," Nate spoke up, "we seek to preserve it by ensuring justice prevails over fear and manipulation." The council conferred in hushed tones before Hathorn addressed them again. "Where is Mistress Carter? She is notably absent." Mercy hesitated. We were informed she was unwell." A flicker of something unreadable passed over Hathorn's face. "Convenient," he remarked dryly. Reverend Parris seized the moment. "You see, they bring accusations without the accused present to defend themselves. This is a farce." Mercy met Hathorn's gaze. "Your Excellency, we ask for a thorough investigation. Let the truth be brought to light through due process." He regarded her thoughtfully. "You understand the gravity of your request. Challenging the court's proceedings is no small matter." "I do," she affirmed, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "But the lives of innocent people hang in the balance. We cannot turn a blind eye." Silence hung heavy in the hall. Finally, Hathorn nodded. "Very well, we will review these documents and reconvene in 3 days' time. Until then, all trials and executions are to be suspended." Relief washed over Mercy, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this was only the beginning. Reverend Parris's eyes blazed with barely concealed fury. "This sets a dangerous precedent, Magistrate. Doubt sown now could unravel all we've accomplished." Hathorn fixed him with a stern look. "Our duty is to justice, Reverend. If there is truth to these claims, we must address them." With a curt dismissal, the council adjourned. As they exited the hall, the group was met with a mixture of hopeful and hostile stares from those gathered outside. "That was bold," Eliza whispered, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and admiration. Mercy exhaled slowly. "We couldn't stay silent any longer." Over the next few days, tension gripped Salem like a vice. Rumours spread like wildfire. Some lauded Mercy as a hero, others denounced her as a troublemaker stirring unrest. The power structures began to shift subtly as those who had long harboured doubts found the courage to voice them. One evening, as Mercy walked home, she was confronted by a small group led by Hester Goodwin, a staunch supporter of the trials. "You've overstepped, girl," Hester sneered, "playing with forces beyond your understanding." Mercy met her gaze calmly. "Seeking truth and justice is hardly overstepping." Hester stepped closer, her eyes cold. "Mark my words, there will be consequences." Before Mercy could respond, Nate appeared at her side. "Is there a problem here?" Hester scoffed. "Protecting your little rebel, are you? Best be careful, both of you." As the group moved on, Nate turned to her. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her hands trembled. "It's becoming clear who our true allies are." He placed a reassuring arm around her shoulders. "You're not alone in this." The day of the reconvened council meeting arrived, the atmosphere in Salem taut with anticipation. The hall was packed, townsfolk eager to witness the unfolding events. Magistrate Hathorn called the session to order. After careful examination of the evidence presented and in light of new testimonies, we have reached a decision. The silence was deafening. "Reverend Parris," Hathorn continued, "the council has found substantial grounds to question your conduct. Effective immediately, you are to step down from your position pending further investigation." An audible gasp swept through the crowd. Reverend Paris stood abruptly. "This is an outrage! You take the word of a handful of dissidents over the sanctity of our sacred mission." "Our duty is to justice," Hathorn reiterated firmly. "Mistress Martha Carter, now recovered, has also provided a statement corroborating the allegations." Mercy's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. She glanced at Martha, who stood at the back of the hall, her expression sombre but resolute. "Furthermore," Hathorn declared, "all charges against the accused are to be dropped. The court will re-evaluate the procedures that led to these miscarriages of justice." A murmur of disbelief and, gradually, applause rose from the assembly. Reverend Paris's face twisted with rage. "You will regret this," he spat before storming out. As the crowd dispersed, many approached Mercy to offer thanks and congratulations. Tears welled in her eyes as the weight of the past weeks began to lift. Her mother embraced her tightly. "You've done it, my brave girl." "It's just the beginning," Mercy replied softly. "There's so much healing that needs to happen." Nate joined them, his smile warm and proud. "You changed the course of our town's history." She looked around at the faces of her friends and neighbours, a sense of unity blossoming. "We all did." That evening a gathering was held in the town square. Lanterns illuminated the space, casting a warm glow over the reunited community. Laughter and music filled the air, a stark contrast to the fear that had pervaded for so long. Mercy stood with Nate at the edge of the festivities, watching children chase each other while adults shared stories and hopes for the future. "You took a dangerous gamble," Nate remarked, his tone light but sincere. She nodded thoughtfully. "I couldn't stand by and do nothing." He took her hand gently. "Your courage inspired us all." She smiled up at him. "I had a good partner." They shared a quiet moment, the world around them fading slightly. "What's next for you?" he asked. She considered the question. "I want to help rebuild trust in our community, perhaps establish a council where voices can be heard without fear." He squeezed her hand. "I think that's a wonderful idea." Her gaze drifted to the night sky, stars twinkling with renewed brilliance. "There's still so much to be done, but for the first time in a long while, I feel hopeful." Nate followed her gaze. "As do I." Mercy turned back to the celebration, her heart full. The weight of responsibility she had felt was easing, replaced by a sense of purpose and belonging. The journey had been fraught with challenges, but taking a stand had not only saved her mother and others, but had also ignited a spark of change that would burn brightly in Salem for years to come. As the night unfolded, she knew that whatever obstacles lay ahead, they would face them together, with courage, integrity, and the unwavering support of a community reborn. Letter from Eliza Putnam to Mercy Hale, March 15th, 1692. "Mercy, I know I am the last person you wish to hear from, but I cannot let my actions go without an apology. I see now that fear gripped me, and that in my weakness I betrayed the truest friend I have ever known. I cannot forgive myself, though I pray you may one day find it in your heart to do so. I was a coward, and I may never mend what I have broken, but please know I am sorry. Your kindness has been a light, and I only wish now to somehow prove that I was once worthy of it. In shame and sorrow, Eliza,